Welcome to this plenary meeting of the London Assembly. Apologies for absence, please.
Yes, Chairman, we've received apologies from Assembly Member Badenoch and Assembly Member Twycross, and Assembly Member Gavron, who is running late.
Okay, thank you very much. Will you please note the recommendation set out at item 2? Thank you. Will you declare... Is something exciting happening?
I don't know, the security isn't...
Yes. Do members have any disclosable pecuniary interests or other relevant interests which relate to items on the agenda for today's meetings? No? Thank you very much. Will you please agree the minutes of the plenary meeting held on the 8th of February 2017 and Mayor's question time held on the 20th February 2017? Thank you. I shall sign those. This morning we have a question and answer session relating to the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation. Can I welcome Victoria Hills, who is the Chief Executive Officer, Doug Wilson, who is the Chief Finance Officer, David Bellamy, who is the Mayor's Chief of Staff, and Fiona Fletcher-Smith, who is Executive Director, Development, Enterprise and Environment. We go straight to a question and answer session, and that will be started with a lead-off question from each political group. And the first question is from Assembly Member Shah. You have Assembly Member Shah's question, don't you?
I do, thank you. Good
Okay,
morning, Chairman.
go for it.
Good morning, Chairman, Assembly Members. The Mayor's been clear that Old Oak and Park Royal is one of the most important regeneration projects in London, and he is ambitious to see that the maximum numbers of jobs and homes are delivered. That includes a high proportion of affordable homes, much higher than planned by his predecessor, and he wants those jobs and homes to be delivered more quickly than previously envisaged. The Mayor wants the area to be transformed to become a great place to live and work, fitting together with the HS2 station now that Royal Ascent has confirmed this will be happening. And he wants to see the OPDC work effectively and efficiently with the rest of the GLA group, providing value for money for Londoners. Following Royal Ascent and the completion of the review, OPDC's activities will include the following priorities. First, continuing to make quick progress in the north of Old Oak, including exploring initial land transfers ahead of the main deal being concluded. Second, negotiating with the government to secure a land deal and financial support that recognises, as has been done elsewhere, the cost of infrastructure and the importance of providing affordable housing. Third, creating a credible long-term plan for bringing forward a new commercial centre at Old Oak South, ensuring the area is planned holistically, that HS2 delivers a station that connects into existing communities and not just an interchange, and addressing concerns about the Crossrail depot. 4. Refreshing the OPDC board. We've completed the recruitment exercise for chair, and the Mayor anticipates consulting with the Assembly in roughly a fortnight. Unfortunately, due to the recommended candidate circumstances, we're unable to confirm their identity today. 5th, working closely with Homes for Londoners and the rest of the GLA group to ensure that the corporation works as effectively and efficiently as possible. This is very much a high-level view, and I'm sure, Assembly Member Shah, that Victoria would be happy to provide more detail on OPDC's organisational priorities in light of what I've said.
David, thank you very much. In your opening remark, you mentioned maximising housing, affordable housing, I think, in particular, which obviously I welcome. My question is, I don't know whether you or Victoria would relate to this. What are your plans to unlock the full potential of Old Oak and Park Royal in regard to housing density whilst making it an attractive place to live in?
Yeah, sure. If I may, Member Shah, I would just like to take an opportunity to set out the context for how, as an organisation, we're going to be able to do that, just following on from what David has said. And clearly a first priority for us is welcoming the new chair. That's a significant appointment that the Mayor will make, and taking forward the recommendations of the review, which of course, as you rightly identify, the delivery of affordable housing is made very clear within that. But in order to get to the delivery of affordable housing, of course, you do need a very strong planning framework to do that. So a big priority for us this year is to get our local plan out to second stage consultation with the SIL, because without that strong framework, it's difficult to meet some of those wider objectives.
Can you please make, sorry for intervening, can you make specific reference to your approach to high densities, please?
Specific approach to high densities, of course. So just it's worth remembering our sort of housing figure was set out in the London plan. You'll recall it's the largest opportunity area in the London plan, so that identified significant opportunity for 25,500 homes, and you know it's fair to say that it's a high density scheme. The reason for that is because of the future connectivity that's coming to Old Oak. It's no coincidence it's the largest opportunity area. Of course, it's the national rail infrastructure that's coming in to a new station in 9 years' time. So our approach through the local plan is to take the figures that were set out in the London plan and look at how we can best accommodate those figures with a very clear and thought through local plan document for consultation with the public this year. So of course we want to maximise the opportunity for density, but it has to be done in a well-planned way that's planned for infrastructure, that's planned for design, and links in with the existing residential communities. So that planning piece is very important for us. And it is just worth noting that, of course, since I think we were last in front of the Assembly, we now have 13,500 homes in our system. 10,500 of those are in pre-application. So whilst certain aspects of this wider regeneration do seem some far way in the future, there is that need to get ourselves very organised now, given the impetus and the desire and the interest to take forward some early schemes.
Yeah. Can I refer to Mayor's City for All Londoners document for consultation, as well as the draft local plan? Both make reference to and make a clear case that greater density does not necessarily mean high-rise. But on the ground, the reality is far from that, because when you look at the opportunity area framework that you mentioned, that talks about promoting greater heights in the existing context, as well as it talks about opportunities for some taller elements in other areas as well. Now, this is worrying both for me as well as for local stakeholders who responded, expressing their concerns. Can you please tell us what is actually OPDC policy on tall buildings, and is high-rise really essential and desirable near tube stations or those nodes?
So the policy will be very clearly set out in that local plan when it comes forward. As you can imagine, we're discussing that document with the GLA, with the deputy mayors, to ensure that we get absolutely the right approach. And I think it's fair to say that where there are opportunities to deliver density, and you might look at those very close to very well connected rail stations, and let's not forget that Old Oak, when the station opens in 10 years, is the only place in the country where HS2 and Crossrail meet. It will have 10 rail lines, and it's going to be a very well connected place. So I think through the local plan development, you can look at where densities are appropriate. Density doesn't always have to mean height, as you say, and we're well aware of good developments throughout London where density has been achieved without going high. We're also well aware where density has been achieved with height that hasn't been welcomed by the local community. So we need to learn from all of that as we bring forward the policy for here. But rest assured, our policy will be absolutely in line with the revised London plan, and we're here to take forward the Mayor's preference for density around well-connected transport nodes or elsewhere.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Copley.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Victoria, first of all. Given the timetable for delivering housing at Old Oak and the Mayor's long-term strategic target of 50% affordable housing, how is OPDC maximising affordable development right from the outset?
Thank you, Member Copley. Well, our first strategic application, which got granted consent by us and then the Mayor in August last year, I'm sure you're aware, reached 40% affordable housing, which is a really important statement from the start that's really, you know, the level that we're looking for in this area, and that has been achieved through us working very closely with the developer to really push them, and working very closely with the GLA Homes for Londoners to bring together a proposal and a package that everybody was happy with. And I'm delighted to say I think we've almost signed the Section 106 on that, so that's going to be on site this summer. And that's really an important statement for us because I think, as you rightly identify, the first developments do act as a bit of a benchmark as you go forward. And if we hadn't have got a high level of affordable housing there, that really wouldn't have well, firstly, it wouldn't have been acceptable, but secondly, it wouldn't have set the right tone for what the corporation wants to try and achieve going forward.
Can you tell us what the 10-year blend is within that 40% of the first development?
I don't have the exact details to hand, but we can get that back to you in writing. Suffice to say, it is more reflective, I think, of the housing SPG that has been consulted on recently. But I'm sorry, I don't have the exact percentage of social rent as opposed to other products.
If you could inform us in writing, that would be fantastic. Now, I welcome the findings of the review in regard to risks inherent in the public land and recognition that land values therefore remain uncertain and unquantified. To what extent are you able to begin calculating viabilities amid such uncertainty?
Well, we've started calculating viabilities, as you might imagine, on all of the land that's within the MOU, but focused very much on the north part of the site. I'm talking about the government land there. And we have our own viability consultants, or have had to date, who have helped advise us for some of those strategic applications, one of which we've just been discussing. And as we move forward, we want to be working hand in hand with the GLA's viability team to bolster our ability to look at that. But you know, it's your starting point here is a lot of this land is strategic industrial land. It's you know, it's dirty rail land, and so your starting point is to look at existing use value and take it from there. I don't know if we want to add anything to that.
The only thing I'd add is we're shortly going to announce a successful tender for our master planning team. And as that master plan develops, we will be working with property consultants doing viability on the emerging proposals to ensure that we do have a viable master plan.
Thank you. And I mean, you mentioned 40% being, I think you sort of said a benchmark for the rest of the site. So would you say now that you would want or you would expect 40% of those 25,500 homes to be some form of affordable housing?
Well, I think, you know, you have to take a pragmatic approach, and clearly the reason why we have viabilities assessments is every site will be different. Some sites will have very heavy infrastructure requirements, other sites won't. Where sites don't have heavy infrastructure requirements, I think, of course, we should be going further in line with the Mayor's aspiration to reach the 50% level. Where sites do have heavier infrastructure requirements, for example, whilst we might want to get to 40%, we might only get to 36. These will all be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. But nevertheless, I do think it's a helpful starting point for our discussions, and indeed for the wider community to be aware of, because a lot of the investors and developers are watching with interest, particularly for when we're approving applications at this early stage.
Okay, thank you. My next question, I think perhaps is more for David or Fiona. The review, or the report from the review, recommends that public land is potentially wholly transferred to the GLA. To what extent does central government recognise the complexities of the land, and what discussions has the Mayor had around the proposal of land transfer?
I'll deal with that. I think the government absolutely recognises how complex the land is there. As Victoria has said, it's been railway land for over 150 years. There are likely to be land remediation issues. However, to be absolutely fair to the government, they've been concentrating on getting royal assent to the HS2 bill, and a lot of Department for Transport Energy has gone into making sure that happens. That has now been achieved just over a week ago. So negotiations will start in earnest again in relation to the key recommendation about the Memorandum of Understanding between ourselves and DFT on the land. But you're absolutely right to point out that it's really complicated land. It's in the single ownership, which is helpful, but this is not very simple brownfield land to redevelop.
Of course. Okay, thank you. Now, my next question is in relation to capturing land value uplift, and a report I did for the Assembly tax trial actually advocated that the Mayor seek powers from central government to trial a land value tax, perhaps on the Old Oak on the Old Oak Development Corporation. First of all, to Victoria, I mean, do you think that a land value tax or some form of land value capture would help to accelerate the delivery of housing and affordable housing on the site?
Well, in a moment I'll defer to my Chief Finance Officer, Doug, on the specifics of the tax and the land value tax trial, and of course we're absolutely aware of the excellent work you've led on behalf of the Assembly to look at how this could be a real significant contributor to the funding of infrastructure, for example, going forward. But a broader point is absolutely we are looking at how you can capture uplift, and I can just draw a couple of anecdotes. Before I do, it's worth mentioning it's extremely early days, so we are at the moment in sort of putting together these ideas, and as you'll be aware in the review report, there's a recommendation for us to bring forward a self-financing model within that, and of course a big part of that is about capturing future value to help pay for some of the work that we're doing now going forward. So that is, it's early days, and those conversations will evolve with the GLA. But just to give you a couple of examples, we're in very active discussions with HS2 in relation, and DFT in relation to their work sites. So those of you who are very familiar with the site, and I know I've taken many of you around it once or if not twice, there are 4 big work sites. The reason the work sites are so big is because it's the critical path, if you like, at Old Oak, where all the tunnel boring machines go in and out, and they need a lot of land to do this construction. So our question to DFT is what's happening to the land afterwards, and the short answer is those owners who haven't done a deal with HS2 now, it's there for DFT to dispose of. So we've spotted that as an opportunity to have, and that's why those sites are in the MOU, because HS2 hasn't been set up to capture the value of the land. DFT at the moment hasn't been set up to capture the value of that land. So in the event of nobody else doing it, we've put our hand up and said, yes, please. That seems a sensible approach. So that's one example, and we're also looking at things like the future capture of business rates, but of course those discussions have to start in earnest with the boroughs. I'm talking about a very specific area around the station, and none of these ideas are novel or contentious. If you look at other regeneration sites, Croydon in particular, you can look at the package they've put together there. So
I'm going to have to stop
land
there
value-
actually because I'm out of time, but I've got a written question down on this. So,
apologies, I haven't answered the land value tax aspect. Do we have time for that? Or?
No, sorry, I've got a written question down.
Okay,
I'll
apologies.
get that.
Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Thank you. Briefly, to the Chief Executive Officer, could you outline for me, aside from transport, what infrastructure are you prioritising?
The infrastructure really falls into three categories. As you rightly identified, transport's a big part of it. I won't talk about that because you've asked for the aside for bit. So the other two bits are the utilities and the social infrastructure. By utilities, I mean, it's basically what it says on the tin, but it's about future-proofing the provision for energy, for power, for water, and gas and any other types of energy, sort of hard utilities. And on the social infrastructure, it's about health and it's about education. So a couple of years ago, we did a DIF, a Development Infrastructure Fund sort of study that looked at all of the broad requirements. And we're now in the process of refining that. We have a consultant, ACOM, working for us directly to refine each and every one of those initial requirements, to work out the phasing of what's required when, and most importantly, the upfront cost.
So you've got plans, I think, for about 25,500 homes across the two sites.
Yeah.
77% of these are going to be 2-bed or larger. What is the expected childcare provision that will be needed for these sites, and how will you accommodate that extra demand?
Yeah. I think it's fair to say, given this early stage that we're at, our starting point has been to look at the education provision. And I think as we move the work forward, we'll get to a level of granularity that looks at specific parts of that, which would include childcare would be part of it. So as I sit here today, I can't say, we've identified the need for 7 nurseries, for example. We're not at that level yet, but I will take that point on board that if that's an area of particular interest, that we do need to be as clear as we can on that.
So I've seen some initial work you're listing what schools off-site and what primary schools on-site and are through 3 to 19, but that doesn't deal with that early childcare that's needed. If you're going to have probably working parents living here, you've told about the great connectivity of it and high density, actually you've got to put that infrastructure in as well, and it's not listed yet in any of your plans.
Well, I think that's a fair point, and that's something we'll take on board, and thank you for raising it.
Okay, thank you. And then the other thing I would like to raise with you, you mentioned about health, but actually you're going to have huge numbers of new people here, but there are no A&E departments at the 2 hospitals closest to the developments. What discussions are you having with the NHS to perhaps even reopen a local A&E in order to meet the likely increased demand?
Well, on health, I mean, you've rightly identified it's a big priority. We already know from the local community it's actually the thing they're most interested in talking about, and that's why I appointed a part-time health advisor, the same health advisor that works for the GLA on the London plan. She works part-time for us, and we've had a health advisor right from the get-go, reporting directly to me to do a number of things, but one is to influence local plan policy, another is to review the applications, but most importantly, to start the conversation with the CCGs, NHS, the borough, public health leads, etc., to really convene that conversation, to understand what they were planning for the future anyway, what capacity they have in some of those plans, and I do take the raised eyebrows, but in central Middlesex there is actually some capacity. We do have a hospital right in the heart of Park Royal that isn't as well used by the community as
it doesn't have an A&E department.
No, so out the start of the conversation with the CCGs in particular is to raise those issues, raise those concerns, and come up with a credible package of phased incremental delivery, increases to health provision. And, you know, of course it's not going to be straightforward, but that's why we've started the conversation now with people who actually understand the language and understand all of the relationships. So that's, you know, it's very early days, but but we've started that.
I can see in your plans you're talking about health centres, GPs, you know, primary care, which is great, but it's just thinking long term about the strain, as we know, in the NHS on hospital services. And A&E, you know, was closed at that local hospital. All the other hospitals are sort of 20 to 35 minutes drive away. You know, that isn't going to be good enough when you've got a high density development. So I hope you'll consider it as part of your work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Time is up. Assembly Member Sahota.
Before I come to the main question, Victoria, can you tell me what discussions you've had with the CCG about the STPs that developed in the area?
I can't tell you the technical...
Were you involved in that or
Yes.
not?
Are we involved in it or not? Peripherally, we're joining the conversation. Clearly, we're not leading the development.
So you've had no influence on it at all?
I wouldn't say we have no influence on it at all.
So you have had influence over it?
Well, we're working, as I understand it, that work is still evolving.
Well, that document is in the public domain, right? I just want to know, have you had an influence on that document?
I would need to check and put that
I
back
should
in
be very
writing to you,
grateful.
but I think we haven't
I
had
should be very
direct
grateful if you
influences.
kindly write to me,
Yeah.
tell me what influence you've had on the STP process, please.
I mean, in the context of what I've just said, we've just started a conversation with the CCGs. I suspect a document that's already published.
It has been
something
published,
that
it is in public
we
domain, it's being asked to be implemented.
that we haven't directly influenced at this
Okay.
stage.
Thank you. But let me come to my main question, please, which is question number 4. How big is an optical is a Crossrail train depot to the overall success of the site?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
How big an optical is a Crossrail train depot to the overall success of the site?
I think if we focus on the recommendations of the Mayor's review, which was very clear about bringing forward the delivery of homes in Old Oak North, and we just remember the figures that we're talking there in the range of sort of 15,000 plus homes, that's broadly the size of Barking Riverside, and that's going to take about 20 years to build out. You know, if we look at other examples, not very far away, Quintain, look at the speed of delivery. You know, we're talking about 20 years worth of development, so I think it's very clear that there must be a credible plan for the Crossrail depot. That's in no dispute. TfL's position, as you know, is that they do have a plan. I think it's right with the new chair coming in that they take the opportunity to dust off that plan and discuss it with the Commissioner and check. You know, our position has always been something needs to be technically deliverable, but it also needs to be commercially deliverable. And in thinking about this, we've obviously been looking at examples not just in the UK but around the world, because you know there are decks that often put over, for example, bits of infrastructure, and you don't. We've got small examples in London, like Dalston on the Overground, but if you look at Flinders Square in Melbourne, or if you look at Hudson's Goodyard in New York, or if you look at Toronto Station Square, these are all depots and rail infrastructure that have managed to put, you know, a nice urban park, for example, outside the front of a station over the top. So what I'm trying to say there is two things. One is we don't need to go into sort of a panic situation at the moment, because we've got 20 years worth of housing delivery to get on with on the north side of the canal. And the second thing is we have some of the best
have limited time. Can we be very precise in answers, please? I mean, we are our time limit. But also, in November last year, the Mayor recommended that TfL should conduct a thorough option appraisal of the repositioning of the retrofitting of the Crossrail depot. Has that appraisal taken place? And if not, where is that appraisal at the moment?
That work is with TfL, and they want to speak with our new chair. The Commissioner will speak with our new chair.
So it's still ongoing work?
It's ongoing work. There is an urgency about it, though. I don't want to come across as flippant by saying we don't need to panic now. Of course there's a need for urgency, because we in our master plan we need to be clear what the future strategy is, which bits are staying, which bits are going,
when do you think this work will be completed?
Pardon?
When do you think this work will be completed? Given there's urgency about it,
Well,
it's been started since last November.
Yes.
When do you think it will be finished?
Well, the appointment of the chair, which will follow in March, April, announcement of, you know, I can assure you this is on the top 10 list of urgent things for our chair to sit down and talk
Sometime this year?
But, well, the master plan will be finished by the end of the year in an early stage. So, absolutely, we have to be clearer we have to be clear by the end of the year, if not before.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Let me come to another question. This is about the challenges of air quality caused by poor surface access to Heathrow Airport. Do you think the proposals of the surface access improvement from the older common development to Heathrow are sufficient to address those air quality concerns?
I mean, I don't think it's that appropriate for me to comment on the package that Heathrow are putting together in terms of their access, but I can comment on the connectivity that Old Oak provides.
Yes, please.
To Heathrow. And it is very significant because you'll recall that previously HS2 had proposed a spur from Heathrow directly north up to the high-speed 2 line, and of course that got cancelled for affordability reasons. And therefore Old Oak becomes the interchange for Heathrow, and that's quite significant because as in positioning Old Oak, we're therefore the gateway, if you like, to the Midlands engine and the Northern Powerhouse further up the route. So what HS2 tell me is that the connectivity to Heathrow, the connectivity through to central London, afforded by that station, they've built in future capacity. They're not building just for existing requirements, they've built in future capacity.
The current plan is for there to be 4 Crossrail trains every hour serving Heathrow. If HS2 spur were to be built, you would expect a similar number of trains per hour using the HS2 line. Do you think that's doubling the capacity is enough between Heathrow and Old Oak Common? Do you think it's sufficient to deal with the demands on the station?
Well, I just have to listen to the experts who are actually building the line, and what they tell me is it is.
So the advice you've been given, right, that it's sufficient?
Yes, I'm not a rail engineer. I have to take advice from people who have just taken a bill through to Royal Ascent, who tell me that it is
so
sufficient
the advice you've been given, is this sufficient?
The advice that I've been given, is it sufficient? Absolutely. I trust the advice that HS2 and DFT have given me, the authority.
And you haven't done an independent appraisal of it yourself? Because you rely upon the advice only?
Well, I mean, if a future chair thinks we need to do some our own modelling as to whether access to Heathrow is a priority or not, of course we'll do that. But as things currently stand here today, we're not doing any transport modelling.
But the future chairman would do that on the basis of evidence or on the basis of some rationale, right? I wouldn't just spontaneously wake up one morning saying, let's look at this again. What would be the things that would be influencing the decision of the new chair then?
Well, partly the views that have been made here to date. I mean, let's be clear. The whole reason for a station at Old Oak is to enable the interchange onto Crossrail. Okay, because HS2 needs to get a third of passengers off before it hits Euston. So our priority is to capitalise on the opportunity afforded by that significant station coming in. Nowhere in my priorities or objectives does it say, I'm increasing access to Heathrow Airport. That may change in the future, but I think given the Mayor's views on where airport expansion is, his views on where airport expansion is preferable, I suspect I might be having discussions more with Gatwick Airport actually about getting the southern trains to stop at Old Oak, which currently don't. They go straight through up to Watford. So I suspect if we're going to do any modelling, it might be that modelling. But I can't rule anything out. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Okay, thank you.
Assembly Member Devonish.
Western Europe, a new town for London, a railway station almost the size of Waterloo. Do you think we're missing the vision thing?
Who's that question to?
The Chief of Staff.
No. I think the Mayor's been very clear about what he wants to see in his commitment to the scheme, as I mentioned in answer to Assembly Member Shah's opening question.
In terms of this project, you came in May, you did your review in late November. It's now March. People that do this for a living often tell me the most important thing in a major project is momentum. Do you think we've got momentum on this project at the moment?
Momentum.
No, I'm not talking about him.
I think I think we've seen a great deal of momentum on the northern part of the site, which, as Victoria said, is the area where we can make a real difference in the short term. In the longer term, clearly, progress is going to be limited by the need to develop the station there, and we're not going to be able to get on in a serious way with development there until that completes in the mid-2020s. And so I think it's absolutely right that Victoria and her team have been focused on the north side of the site, making strong progress there. And now that we have royal assent on HS2, that removes uncertainty and allows us to look at the site in a wider sense.
I mean, just to add to that, I mean, far from sort of losing momentum, the HS2 proposal only got an all-party sort of vote in support of it in early 2014. 3 years later, we've got royal assent. This is record speed for a national rail project, and that kind of momentum sort of spurs forward the local developers and investors who are bringing these schemes forward much earlier than we thought. And that's why we've got to really sort of get going on preparing and making the most of that.
When you appoint in a couple of weeks your new executive chairman, will the industry and government think this person is definitely a big beast, up to the job?
I don't want to get into a kind of playground game of give me a clue about the identity of the person. What I should say is that we ran a very thorough professional recruitment process involving independent person. And as the Assembly member will be aware, the Mayor doesn't directly make an appointment. The Mayor consults with the Assembly on that appointment, and the Mayor obviously looks forward to hearing the views of the Assembly on the proposed candidate. And having been involved in the recruitment process, I expect a positive reaction from Assembly members when they have the opportunity to meet and question that person.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Dismore.
Can I ask David and Fiona, could I explore with you the pros and cons of HS2 terminating temporarily at Old Oak Common? In July last year, the Mayor said, quotes, "I've been clear that I would like to understand whether HS2 could terminate at Old Oak on a temporary basis to minimise disruption and allow for a better overall solution for Euston Station. This is something I'm discussing with Transport for London." Could you confirm what the results of that discussion were and whether Old Oak Common could become a temporary terminus?
Yeah, Sean, I'll deal with that. Yes, we are still pushing that be the case. You'll be aware that the capacity problems at Euston exist today. And one of the concerns for us is that if HS2 add to that problem, before Crossrail 2 is open and running, the problems at Euston, both overground and in the underground station, could be extreme. So that is still a live conversation. Again, back to an earlier answer, the DFT have been, I won't say distracted, but have been concentrating mainly on getting royal assent. It is now time to get into the detail of how exactly HS2 is going to come into London, how Old Oak will work and how Euston itself will work.
Well, thanks for that. And this is really what I was going to put to you, because even if the government were to give the go-ahead to Crossrail 2, and that's yet to finally be agreed, on the present plan and timetable, it would take at least another 4 years or so for Crossrail 2 to be completed before HS2 comes into Euston on present plans. Given that the Northern and Victoria Line platforms at Euston and indeed King's Cross now are often so overcrowded that they have to be closed at rush hour, is there any way that the onward transport network could cope with the predicted large number of HS2 passengers, absent Crossrail 2 or termination at Old Oak Common? Isn't the only workable solution to terminate HS2 temporarily at Old Oak Common, to link it in with Crossrail 1, where we have the capacity now, or will have when Crossrail 1 opens, for that period of time, so HS2 and Crossrail 2 could come to Euston more or less at the same time, and to allow a proper scheme actually to be developed for the comprehensive regeneration of Euston rather than the piecemeal proposals we're seeing at the moment.
Absolutely, it is the answer, because you're right in pointing out there will be a gap even if Crossrail 2 is agreed in the timetable we would like. The issue for us is, though, we also have to maintain pressure on government to make sure that they properly address the Euston issue, and that a temporary solution doesn't become a permanent solution So there is a balance for us, but absolutely Old Oak is very much part of the answer to the capacity issue at Euston in the, I would say, medium term, not just short term, but not letting the government off the hook on fixing Euston.
David, do you want to add anything?
I think what I would say is that you're very right to identify the pressure that exists on the north-east, south-west access through London. Colleagues will be aware this week the Crossrail 2 team have submitted the strategic outline business case to the Department for Transport. The government will spend the next couple of months looking at that, and I think it's very important that everybody who wants to see both relief for those lines, addressing the issues that there will be at Euston when phase 2 of High Speed 2 opens, and also the consequences of the increased growth in passengers that we're seeing coming into Waterloo and will continue to see coming into Waterloo, that we stress to the government that this is a scheme of national importance, and it's absolutely essential for our economy, both London more regionally in our role as the economic powerhouse of the country, that we make Crossrail 2 happen.
I mean, this was happened before with HS1, where initially it terminated temporarily at Waterloo, pending the proper proposals coming forward for St Pancras. So there is a precedent for this.
I think that, and the difference is that at Waterloo at the time there was the capacity to cope with HS1.
Chair, mine's about the exemplar development in terms of the environmental ambitions. So perhaps Victoria would like to start.
Thank you. There is an opportunity here to be absolutely exemplar environmentally, because of course you're not retrofitting anything into an existing community from the outset. You're building in from the start. So we're working very closely with the Sustainable Development Commission. We're working very closely with GLA Environment, and indeed we provide an opportunity for the Deputy Mayor for Environment to sort of spearhead or drive forward particular priorities that she has, to try them in Old Oak, because there are opportunities galore given the amount of development, whether that be for the provision of heat, whether it be for the treatment of water, whether it be for how people are moving around the environment. So our local plan will set out that policy context. And that's quite a powerful document, because you can have all the best aspirations in the world, but the only way you require people to deliver things is if you put it into statutory planning policy. So it's right that we're working hand in hand with GLA Environment to achieve that.
So will you be, I mean, obviously at the moment the local plan is within the context of the existing London plan and the existing set of environmental strategies, and the Mayor is looking to obviously revise the London plan with the precursor City for All Londoners document, and we've also heard that the environment strategy will be coming out in the late spring. Will you be looking to up what you're doing at the moment in terms, I mean, obviously you replied to Assembly Member Pidgeon talking about energy and water. Will you be upping your game around issues like biodiversity, which we haven't mentioned as yet?
Yeah. Absolutely. So rest assured, our benchmark is not the old London plan. Our benchmark is what's being written up on the 3rd or 4th floor in this building in preparation for that strategy. So we're aligning our aspirations to deliver above and beyond. But it is early days, and we'll be having these conversations with the board in the lead up to that plan going out to consultation. But there's a golden opportunity here to do something quite special, quite flagship. And if I just take, for example, let's call it ecotech or green tech. West London already has more businesses in the circular economy than any other region in London. And there's a golden opportunity working with the universities that are there already, Imperial, Brunel, others, to really capitalise on a green tech sector, if you like, for London. I know it's been sort of mooted before, but there is no sort of green tech flagship location in London. So, there's an opportunity perhaps with Park Royal that we could look to do that here. And that really could drive forward innovation, which then leads to some of the solutions that could be delivered in the future communities over the decades to come, some of which won't have been invented yet.
Very, very welcome, particularly as Assemblymember Devenish was saying, this is a very, very large scale scheme that I think will have the eyes of possibly beyond Western Europe if we bring this to fruition in the right way. But we obviously do need to tackle the issues that Assemblymember Sahota referred to around air quality. So it's not just about the circular economy, it is about making sure that we develop something that in 2050 is still seen as an exemplar, rather than something that we're thinking, where did we go wrong, and perhaps we've made a mistake. So what will you be doing around areas like, for example, it has been put to me that issues around sustainable drainage is going to be an issue, because obviously this is going to be a major change in terms of the number of dwellings on the site. Is that something that's going to be absolutely incorporated right from the very beginning?
Yes, absolutely has been, and we've been meeting with Thames Water for over 2 years talking about these sorts of issues. We've got a great asset called the Grand Union Canal running through the heart of the site. That might be part of the solution in terms of sustainable drainage. You know, all of these ideas are being pulled together, not by us independently, but with some of the great minds in this building to help come up with some really great solutions for that. I wish I could say more on it, but I can't yet, because it is incredibly early days. But I'm sure we'd be delighted to come to the Environment Committee in due course to give a fuller update on where we are with all of that. And just on air quality, it's worth noting, given the connectivity here, we really are talking about zero car. We've just consented our second major scheme on Scrubs Lane. That's a zero car development. And that's a net improvement, because what's there at the moment is a business that generates a lot of movements. Why shouldn't we really go for it here? We've got National Cycle Route number 6 and the Cycle Superhighway 1, basically enclosing the sites. You've got opportunities to build in healthy high streets. We've started those conversations with Deputy Mayor for Transport. And so there's some brilliant opportunities. And where you do need vehicles, why not put in an ultra low emission zone, or have some sort of AV autonomous vehicle system, looking to the future. And we've really embedded those principles in the local plan. But of course, I'm not going to sit here and say we've got it all right. We do want to have that genuine sort of conversation with the Assembly, with the Environment Committee here. And we should be sort of challenged to go further. Of course we should, but thank you.
Well, I'm sure the Environment Committee would be very happy to challenge you to go further, as you can imagine. Just as you mentioned the scrubs, can I just very briefly ask you, do you have any comments about the removal of the scrubs from the OPDC area? Because obviously that will then require further space to be set aside.
I mean, we're going to take forward the recommendation that's in the review, and I have nothing further to comment than that. It's obviously on the list of priorities that we'll be discussing with incoming chair as to how we do that.
Just to be clear, the recommendation of the review was not that the scrubs be removed from the boundary, but that we investigate whether it should be. And so that's clearly a process that has to be done, and we need to consult with the relevant local authorities and communities and other interested parties in order to work out what is the best solution there.
Okay, thanks very much. Second
table question, Assembly Member Curtin.
Shall I read?
Yes, this is relating to industrial land.
Businesses.
Yeah, businesses. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the question. It's as you may know, West London is the UK's second largest powerhouse. Indeed, the economy of West London is over 50 billion a year, is larger than Birmingham's economy. So it's very significant and really nestled within the heart of that is Park Royal, the UK's largest and most successful industrial park. And we can say that because the rental values are higher and the vacancy rates are low. And it's absolutely important given that we protect it, and indeed that's why Park Royal was put within the boundary of Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation. So OPDC is preparing a local plan to set out a very clear policy that it will be protected as strategic industrial land. But as you can imagine, with a new station, 90% the size of Waterloo, opening in 9 years' time, of course it's going to be very vulnerable to residential encroachment. So we've actually gone one stage further. We've consulted on an Article 4 I've lost the word, Article 4, direction, thank you. And that's planning jargon to basically say it's removing the permitted development rights to just convert office to residential, because we want to protect those. So we've been working very sort of hand in hand with the Park Royal Business Group to identify their priorities, their strategies for Park Royal going forward. But not only must it be protected, it must be enabled to grow. So that's sort of multifaceted, if you like. There's a need for some infrastructure investments, some very quick fix solutions on transport, but there's also a need to support it, intensify, because I don't know how well you know Park Royal, but it's very it's quite busy. There's a lot of over 2,000 businesses there, but it's very low density, sort of one or two stories. And we've been working very closely with Seagrow, who run a lot of the estate, to look at innovation, to look at intensification. And that's important because, of course, it does provide an opportunity to decant a very small number, but very significant nevertheless, of SMEs that are currently within the Old Oak core development site on Car Giant's land. And so we as an aside to that, we have been putting pressure on HS2 to up their game in terms of engagement with businesses, because a number of them will be CPO'd through the bill process, not least to make way for work sites. And our position has always been we really want to retain them. If we look at examples of the Olympic Park, there was wide-scale CPOs at that time for very sound reasons, but all those businesses went to Kent and they went to Essex, and they're not coming back because they can't afford to come back. What we want to ensure is that the very rich businesses there can stay in the area, and we want to support them every way that we can do that. And just to give you a snippet, and I appreciate time's short, a little unknown fact, we've got the largest prop and costume cluster in the country in Park Royal. It's the largest in Europe, and it has a spin-offs of about 20 or 30 companies working. Why is it there? Because of the historic location to the BBC, clearly. But this is a really important part of London's economy, and the diversity of the businesses in there is what makes Park Royal special. So we want to keep it, we want to protect it, we want to support it. We recognise it's not going to be easy, but we can learn lessons from elsewhere.
What concerns me is the businesses who are already there, and you mentioned there's 2,000 businesses there, and some of them are going to be CPO'd. You know, you had this situation you mentioned in another area, the Olympic Park, where businesses had to move out to Kent and Essex. But my concern is, how many of those 2,000 businesses are going to be CPO'd? And if they do have to move out of London, what are you going to do to make sure that they have premises and that they won't go out of business? So that, you know, a CPO might actually, it causes a lot of upheaval in a business if it has to move. What are you going to do to make sure that no businesses collapse and go out of business?
I mean, I appreciate firsthand the upheaval because I meet with the business regularly and they tell me. But let's be clear where the statutory responsibility lays for this, okay? Because there's a bill process, and HS2 are required to work with those businesses to find them somewhere else to go or to compensate them. Now, what we don't want to happen is let's just compensate them and they go, which is why we've dedicated resources to actually ensuring that HS2 are doing a genuine piece of work, which is identifying properties that these businesses can go to within Park Royal or West London, rather than just appointing an agent and sort of ring there and see if they can help you.
So it's not your responsibility, it's HS2's responsibility, is that what you're saying?
It's their responsibility because they're acquiring the properties, but we have a responsibility to ensure the area is planned carefully and remains a rich, diverse economy, and so we can do that through local plan policy, but we can also do that through our influence to ask HS2 to up their game. So we're not just going to wash our hands and say it's all HS2's fault, sorry, we can't help you.
Can I ask you a couple of specific questions about numbers? How many of the 2,000 businesses are going to be CPO'd and will have to move?
Off the top of my head, we're talking sort of double digits, but we'll have to get those figures to you.
So between 10 and 99.
Well, it's a bit more than that, I think, but we'll get the figures.
So it's more than double digits. It's more than 10 to 99.
Well,
is it more than 99?
You know, I
That's not
see
double
various,
digits,
I
that's
see various
triple
figures,
digits.
and I don't have the figures
You
to my
said it
fingertips
was-
because we're not
So
the
I'm
ones
just a
who
little
CPO
bit
them.
confused because you said it was double digits and then I said
I
it's
misheard you,
between 10
sorry, I
and
thought you
99
said-
and then you said, well, it's a bit more than that.
No, I
so
thought-
that's triple digits.
No, I thought you said 10 to 20, and that's why I said it's a little bit more than that. So it's,
I did say 10 to 99. Anyway,
yeah, I know,
never
but the
mind.
acoustics are not great.
Okay. What will it cost? Do you know? I mean, you say it's the responsibility of HS2, so you may not know. But what will it cost to relocate the businesses that have to move out?
I mean, I'd love to know the answer to that question. They're not going to tell me. It's a commercial matter. This is all negotiation discussions that their agents are having with individual businesses on the ground.
Okay, so maybe it's something that you can't answer that I would need to ask HS2. Okay.
I mean, one of the problems it's a challenge is they are obviously a private company the way they've been set up. So we can't require that they have to share all of that, that commercial data with us. But that's not to say that we won't try.
No one can really give us an answer on that then.
Well, HS2 can give you an answer on that, and we of course we will ask them, but I certainly don't have a figure here today to say it's going to cost them 2 million or 50 million to relocate all the businesses.
Okay, yeah. Now the figure I've got is that the whole redevelopment is going to create 55,000 jobs. Is that a figure that you recognise?
It's 65,000, 55 in the core development site, and 10. We think you can get another 10 into Park Royal, given the opportunity for intensification.
Now, are they temporary jobs, or are they jobs that are going to be associated with the construction, or are they permanent jobs?
That's the end. That's the end state. So that's not the in situ construction jobs. It's the end state of a new commercial centre in the south and intensification of Park Royal.
Okay. And the businesses that are there at the moment, the 2,000 businesses you say, most of them will be stayed there. Most of them will be unaffected. Is that correct?
The vast majority will be unaffected by a CPO. They won't be unimpacted by construction traffic.
Right. So some of them will be lost and then recreated as part of your 65,000 figure. Is that correct?
Well, on Park Royal, we're talking about 10,000 figure. So the 55,000 over in Old Oak is all completely new, as is the 10,000 in Park Royal. So, I mean,
so 2,000 businesses may be impacted in Park Royal, and then in that area, then 10,000 jobs will be recreated. So how many jobs will be lost of those 2,000 businesses in Park Royal that may be impacted by the redevelopment? How many of the jobs associated with those 2,000 businesses will be lost before 10,000 jobs are created?
Well, our starting point is we want it to be zero for the reasons I've just set out.
But if you want it to be zero, but what will it be?
Well, I can't make a prediction
how
of what it's
many
going to be.
jobs
All I can say is
associated with those 2,000 businesses?
how many jobs are associated with the 2,000 businesses? It's in the region of 45,000 employees.
So 45,000 jobs may be lost, and 10,000 created.
No, I didn't say that. No, I didn't.
No,
say
you
that.
didn't. I'm just okay. Is that something that you recognise may happen as a worst case scenario?
No. We're talking about a small number of businesses that get CPA that we're very keen to be relocated within the existing Park Royal.
I'm out of time
estate.
now. Maybe that's something that we can investigate further. Thank you.
Absolutely. More than happy to do so.
Okay, Assembly Member Gavron.
Yes, Victoria, you've given us quite a lot of context with this exchange. I want to go on talking about the industrial site. This is Park Royal is probably the largest industrial location, strategic industrial location in the whole of Europe, and it's definitely the industrial engine of the London economy and therefore a huge contributor to the UK economy. So everything you're saying about protecting it, and I really welcome what you were saying about the Article 4 direction, and strengthening it is really important. Now, you've talked about relocating some of the industries from Old Oak into Park Royal, but am I not right that you're also thinking of taking land for housing, residential, out of Park Royal?
You are absolutely right. And this will be the case that we put before an inspector when we take the planning, the local plan to a planning
Can you be
inquiry.
very clear about numbers?
So the numbers of businesses that are within...
No, I know all about the numbers. I mean, numbers of homes.
Oh, number
How
of
many
homes.
homes are you thinking? How many residential units are you thinking of putting on industrial land in Park Royal?
Well, if we look at the land that's within the core development site, I think it's fair to say the vast majority of the land in those 24,000, because it's 1,500 in Park Royal homes, but the 24,000 homes that are actually within the core development area of Old Oak, the vast majority of those are on strategic industrial land.
I'm talking about the Park Royal industrial sites.
On the Park Royal industrial site...
How many homes are you going to put on Park Royal industrial sites? Because you've talked about protecting and strengthening it, but if you're taking industrial land for housing units, then that doesn't much sound like protecting and strengthening it.
So I just want to be clear on that. We're not... The Article 4 direction we're putting in place, if we were to take homes... If we would put homes on the strategic industrial land, we're in breach of our own Article 4 direction.
So you're not doing that?
There are residential areas already within Park Royal. We're talking about intensification of the existing residential areas.
Okay.
There's already
there's
substantial
no,
residential
I'll come
population
to it
within
then.
the boundary.
So, Victoria, there's no net loss of industrial land?
That's the position, but I'd be more than happy to put that in writing.
I'd love you to put that in writing. There's no net loss of industrial land in the Park Royal Industrial Strategic
We've got to be very clear in putting that case forward to the inspector. Otherwise, we're in breach of not only Mayor's policy, we're in breach of our own policy. So let me write to you on that matter, please.
It would really be helpful to know that. And then you're adding to that no net loss and you're intensifying it, because that's really important to know, because that will not just protect it, it will strengthen it. Now, in terms of lots of concerns have been raised by businesses about them being driven out because they're adjacent to residential development. And I'm just wondering, are you thinking of introducing an agent of change condition so that there's a requirement on residential development to actually protect their residences from noise and disruption, so we don't drive out the businesses?
An agent of change provision, would
that be an idea?
Yeah, I mean, it's an idea. Let me take that away and let me wrap that back up in my response.
That would be good. And are you also thinking of having a business improvement district? Or developing one?
I would love a business...
large industries, small industries, micro businesses?
I'd love a business improvement district, but for reasons we haven't got time to go into now, the businesses previously voted against that, which is why we're coming up with an alternative strategy of an estates team, we hope. We're just about to start some feasibility on that.
Okay, that's interesting to hear. I just want to... We're talking now, there's been a lot of talk about vision. I just want to ask about green goods and services, or low carbon goods and services, because this is now a growth sector for London. And we're growing in London about 6% per annum, but globally the sector's growing at 12%. And I just want to know, there's a compelling case, and you mentioned something about it, for a clean tech cluster. Imperial have been working on it with the Sustainable Development Commission. There's already a seeding funding with the European Regional Development Funding. And I'm just wanting to know now, what strong signals is OPDC giving to the development and a programme of action for a clean tech cluster on Park Royal?
Well, thank you for raising it again, and you're absolutely right. We've got world-leading universities on our doorstep. I mentioned before Brunel, Imperial College London, Middlesex University, University of West London, and they're all chomping at the bit to do what you've described. And I think I mentioned earlier that there's more jobs in the circular economy in West London than any other part of the city. So with that as a starting point, it wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility to think we might capitalise on that. And I've long been an advocate of, if we don't do it soon, somebody else is going to, because there is no clean tech cluster in London. There might be developments outside of London, but there's a real opportunity to do it.
I agree it can promote not a circular economy, but it will also underpin your food distribution. It can also help with smarter buildings, air quality, digital services. And I just want to know, what would be your... It's no use just saying, well, if we don't do it, somebody else will. What is the programme of action on developing, as fast as possible, a clean tech cluster?
Well, we've already started discussions with Deputy Mayor for Environment on this, so it's difficult for me to say.
So you've begun discussions?
Yes, we've started those discussions with the Deputy Mayor and her team.
Okay.
It's a case of which is watch this space as we develop, but there's a desire from us, there's a desire from her, and you know, we need to formulate that now into a plan of action. But I'm not ready to say any more on that.
Okay. Could I just ask Fiona and David, what signals could the Mayor give then? Because if industry got strong signals, that would help.
I think the Mayor's new environment strategy, which will be a combination of all of the original environment strategy documents, will send a very strong signal on this, as will the Mayor's economic development strategy. And also the newly launched LEAP, London's enterprise panel, is showing a very keen interest in how that we support businesses in this area. Also, while we still have remaining European funds, and we don't have them for much longer, it's making sure that we assist Victoria's team in bidding for ERDF funding to support business growth in that area. But as Victoria says, it's really quite early days in all of this.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you. I've got one more question. I want to know what the findings are of your study on primary uses. Is it going to be a... I'm out of time, sorry. Stadium-led regeneration. I was going to ask that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Could I ask, please, that the information that you've promised to give both Assemblymember Curtin and Assemblymember Gavron relating to industrial jobs and industrial space be circulated to all members, please? Yes. Okay. And the initial reply to be initially addressed to me. Thank you very much. We now go on to the third table question, which is from Assemblymember Boff. This is about housing.
Your question is about funding and our ability to meet our priorities. As I'm sure you'll appreciate, with a project as complex as this, our assumptions will change as we become better informed by studies that are currently ongoing or will commence next year. However...
I'm sorry, Chairman, I'm having difficulty in hearing Doug. I wonder
sorry,
if you could you lean forward slightly towards the microphone?
I'll make sure I face the microphone. Is that better?
That's much better. Thank you so
Apologies. Much. So our assumptions will change, but currently, based on the information available, I believe we require a revenue budget of about 9 million per annum.
Sorry, there was a cough directly over that. What did you say, sorry?
Currently, I believe we require a revenue budget of about 9 million per annum. In addition to that, some level of capital funding will be necessary, both to demonstrate our commitment to bringing forward development and to enable us to capture some of the land uplift inherent in the development of the site. As I think members are aware, that for next year falls into three parts, really. We have an agreed budget of 6.9 million, but there's a further 2 million contingency held by the GLA on our behalf, and we have an invitation from the Mayor to make capital proposals to him. So the answer to your question is that with access to that 2 million contingency, I believe we can meet our priorities fully, and we will be putting capital proposals to the Mayor in very short order.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. What was the budget last year?
11.4 million.
You've mentioned that there is £2 million of contingency.
Yes.
That would mean that the contingency was about 29–30% of the actual budget. Do you know of other projects where there is a contingency of 30% of the budget?
With very high-risk projects, it could be up to 20%. I think it would be rare for it to be much higher than that, but it's certainly possible.
The Olympic Park was just verging on 21%, and that was a equally complex project, in fact, more complex project. Why would we have why would we budget for such an extreme amount of contingency?
May I step in?
Please do.
Might be helpful. I think apologies, this may be a long answer, but I'll try and explain the situation clearly. So, as you know, the budget for 16-17 was revised from that approved from the Assembly when the final GLA budget was set by the previous Mayor, which set the budget of 11.4 million. At that stage, the then chair envisaged that the additional £6 million allocated for 16-17 may be needed for future years. OPDC, when they came to the challenge process that we ran as part of the budget process, asked for £8.9 million, and so from a start there was a recognition that the full additional 6 wasn't needed for their work plan for the year ahead. And of course it's important to understand that a development corporation, particularly one in the early stages of its development, is not an operating body like, say, the fire brigade, and so you would expect its expenditure to profile to be more dynamic and changing than you would see in an operational, functional body. In the challenge process, we identified, I think, 4 key areas that led to changes to the budget. Firstly was the ability for the GLA to provide greater non-financial support to OPDC. In principle, that's through Homes for Londoners and establishing that as a shared service which is available. As Assembly members will be aware, OPDC has a very strong track record of making use of shared services from around the group. I have a big long list in front of me of them, and it's one of the real strengths of OPDC to do that in terms of the efficiency point that we spoke about earlier. And so help from the GLA and also from Fiona's regeneration and planning teams were one of the things we identified. Secondly, we identified the need to avoid duplication in terms of contingency between the OPDC and also the reserve that the Mayor holds in the GLA for development corporations, which is a reserve that's forecast to have £33.9 million in it for the 2 development corporations, and that stands behind the Mayor's commitment to support both development corporations in their activities. Thirdly, we're ensuring that the budget allowed OPDC to focus their work on Old Oak North and the great progress that we're making there ahead of negotiations with the government on the wider issue around land transfer. And finally then, a proposal from OPDC about establishing this additional funding source that would enable OPDC to become self-sufficient in the long term and allow us to recycle proceeds back into OPDC so that we answer the challenge about how OPDC gets the resources to deliver in the long term on the south side of the site. That's been established as a contingency fund purely because at this stage in the budget process there wasn't time to work up the level of proposal necessary to sign off on that amount of money, and that's something that Victoria and Doug and their teams are looking at, and the Mayor very much looks forward to receiving that proposal.
If I could go back to asking Mr Wilson, what was the level of contingency in that 11.4 million budget?
The level of contingency then was round about £1 million from memory.
Which would be about 10%, which is what one could expect from major projects.
Yes. We were at an earlier stage of our development, though.
And also, repeating the point about shared services, there's a shared service with financial services here, and that's why we have the Development Corporation Reserve, so that if contingency is needed, we're able to release resources from that.
I just ask, I didn't quite understand your third point, Mr Bellamy, when you said that in order to avoid duplication of contingency, which you said was held, the figure of 39 million was held for both of the mayoral development corporations, that you, in order to avoid duplication, you then add contingency to the ODPC.
The decision was to not hold a separate contingency line within the OPDC budget, but instead to make that available through the Development Corporation Reserve if it's necessary to call on that contingency.
But you have made an allocation of contingency to the OPDC budget.
So the OPDC budget will have appropriate contingency in individual line items as is normal in budgeting. Beyond that, contingency will come from the Development Corporation Reserve.
But the Mayor has given an explicit, I misunderstand, this is, so the £2 million contingency cannot be expressed in one lump. You're saying that every single project now has a portion of contingency set against it.
So, saying a few different things. Firstly, in the budgeting process, it is normal, when, as you set individual line items, to be prudent in that approach, and that's what we would expect to happen. Secondly, if in the general case there is need for additional resource because of things that happen during the year that are not expected, the Mayor's Development Corporation Reserve is available to provide support to OPDC to enable that to happen. Thirdly, then there is this proposal to make OPD self-sufficient in the long term, which we think is a very interesting proposal. OPDC are going to work it up, and that is the item that we've said that £2 million is held by the Mayor, and we can make that available if, when that work's done on that proposal, it holds the promise we believe it will.
So the £2 million is not in their budget, it is being held by the Mayor?
Yes.
So the budget that has been, so Mr Wilson, the budget is not 8.9 million, it's 6.9 million, is that correct?
Yes, that's what I said. I said it's 6.9, and with access to the 2 million contingency, we will have sufficient resource.
But
so we require access to that 2 million.
Okay, so this is a budget that doesn't work without contingency, is this correct?
In my opinion, yes.
And I'd just like to add to that I'm very confident that we can make a strong case through the work that we're doing at the moment, and some members have picked up on aspects of this in terms of land value capture, etc., as to why as to why we need that contingency sort of going forward.
If the budget doesn't work without the contingency, then why shouldn't you just absorb the contingency in the budget?
Well, I can't answer that question.
I'm sorry, it wasn't addressed to you, actually.
I believe the budget works for what OPDC has to do in the year ahead in terms of getting a focus on the north side of the site, really getting that moving, building on the progress that has been made, and then on the south side of the site, the work that is appropriate to do there, given the renegotiation that needs to happen with the government around the land deal. And so, in that sense, I believe the budget is appropriate. The important point is that it's a very interesting proposal that OPDC have brought forward about how we can make themselves self-sufficient, and that they can have the funding they need in the long term as we resolve the matter with the government. And we want that to happen, and we want to get cracking on that. And as you say, I think it's a very good idea. The work will be done, and I would anticipate a strong case coming forward, and that will be released.
If we can go back to what you just said, Mr Bellamy, you said the budget is adequate.
Yes.
Which budget are we talking about? The £6.9 million or the £6.9 million plus contingency?
The £6.9 million with the expectation that we're going to get a strong proposal that will release the extra £2 million in order to make OPDC self-sustaining in the long term.
So £6.9 million is adequate for the budgeted items that have been presented to you, the budget for the OPDC?
Yes, given the decisions that we've made to provide additional shared services from within the GLA's resources.
Can I interrupt? We seem to be blinded with figures here. Is the £2 million, which is held in effect by the GLA, is that hypothecated to the OPDC?
Yes, it's held awaiting this proposal, which, as we say, we very much look forward to receiving, because we think it's a very good idea.
So it will be hypothecated. So nobody else can have it.
So it's held there in the budget, and absolutely for the expectation is that it will go to OPDC.
Thank you, Chair, for assisting me, because that's exactly what I was going to say. Is that what is if it's only going to be used, this money is only going to be used for the OPDC. In what way? Why is it residing in a pot of money that's available to the other mayor's project?
There's a simple matter of where the money has to sit in the budget. You will know from the group budget that the Mayor's Development Corporation Reserve is not in any way running down to have less than £2 million in it in the years ahead, and so absolutely, the money is there to fund this, and we know all about it.
So when you said to us that there is a pot of £39 million...
33.9.
I beg your pardon, I do apologise. 33.9, I apologise. So £33.9 million for contingency for the other schemes as well. That really is only £31.9 million with £2 million allocated to the OPDC.
Essentially, yes, on the proviso that the strong case comes forward, and then we will release the money. As we say, we have every expectation that it will be a strong case, but we didn't make the allocation in the budget because more work needed to be done in order that we had the appropriate degree of certainty.
So we have a statement from Mr. Wilson that in his view the project requires about I don't want to miss, you said 8 million or 8 point?
I said
9 million. In Mr. Wilson's view, the project requires 9 million. Why don't you just give it the 9 million?
Because we are very focused on, across the entire group, on ensuring that money is allocated in a way that is fully justified. And as I've said repeatedly, I think this idea for the extra £2 million is a very good proposal from OPDC. We need to work it up to the degree to give us the confidence that it will work and it will really help us address the long-term challenge we have about how we fund OPDC through what is going to be essentially a 30-year project.
Mr. Bellamy, do you know of any other mayoral projects that have 29% contingency?
I don't view it as 29% contingency. I view it as funding for a particular project that we think will be very advantageous in helping the long-term finances of OPDC.
You don't view the contingency as contingency? It's not contingency, obviously.
It's been held in contingency for a specific purpose. It is not general contingency for anything that may arise. If something else arises, then we can consider that using the rest of the Development Corporation Reserve, which is what it is there for as we work with both development corporations through the year.
So when the Mayor referred to it as contingency, he was wrong. Is that correct?
I think the Mayor is right to refer to it in contingency, in that its release is contingent on this proposal coming forward. It's not general contingency for any purpose. That is what more generally we have the Development Corporation Reserve for.
I've been reminded that I really should, when I come to these sessions, bring a dictionary with me. The contingency, as far as I'm concerned, is something that you allocate on the basis that you may overspend or there may be variations in a project. Is that correct? That to me, is, as a layman, is what I understand contingency to be about.
Yeah.
Not what you absolutely expect will happen.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
So you're saying, however, that you absolutely expect there to be calls upon that £2 million?
So we're saying that we think it's a very good idea. We are not absolutely certain that the case will be made because the work hasn't been done and couldn't be done in time in the budget process. We look forward to receiving that because we think it's a very good idea, and we're confident that the case will be made and it will be released, but it is contingent on that piece of work being done. if that piece of work had been done in terms of the budget and shown the outcome I expect it to show, then it would have been included in the budget.
I mean, I think it's worth just noting we are in a very unusual position here in putting together the budget in the absence of a chair, and therefore, you know, as David's highlighted, if the work had been done before, then we might not be in this situation. But of course, we are in this situation, and it's a unique situation for this year. But it's, you know, that case is going to be quite an important case because it could actually act as a bit of benchmark for how other projects could have a bit more upfront funding. I know TfL are looking at these things not just in Crossrail 2 but across the piece. So it's an important piece of work. Yes, we're confident we'll have a compelling case, but I think it's fair to say could we have been 100% confident at the time the budget was being written? You know, it's there as a contingency for us to draw upon at the moment. I'm confident we'll have a good case as to how we're going to use that money for the greater public good.
Can you imagine a situation, Ms Hills, where you end up the year without calling on the contingency?
Well, given all the really, you know, quite urgent and significant work that we've got on at this moment in time, I can't foresee a situation where I'm unable to create a compelling case as to how we can make best use of that funding to meet the strategic objectives that David set out at the beginning of this meeting, given, you know, the urgency, the momentum that's now moving forward following consent of the HS2 bill. But you know, do I have that case sat in front of me at the moment? No, but we're working on it.
Thank you, Ms Hills. What did you originally ask the Mayor for this budget?
Repeat that.
8.9 million.
And to what do you attribute the underspend from the 11 point? I'm not sure who to ask. Mr. Wilson, perhaps Mr. Wilson. To what do you attribute the underspend on the 11.4 million?
I think there are a number of factors in that, bearing in mind the 11.4 million was our estimate a year earlier, and we are working very much with estimates at the moment. We also looked very closely at areas where we might be able to achieve some savings to ensure we were operating as efficiently as possible. And there are elements of work where, as part of our discussions with other stakeholders, in particular DFT and HS2, they're now engaged in some studies that we had originally envisaged we would have to do, particularly in relation to overstation development, because that was something that at the outset they were not prepared to entertain, but their position has moved on that.
Ms Hills, was the £8.9 million your idea?
Well, not my sole idea. I mean, as you might imagine, I consulted extensively with my senior management team about what we absolutely needed to do going forward, what we could lose, but what we couldn't lose. And we discussed that as a management team. I discussed it very closely with my chief finance officer, and then we discussed it very closely with the GLA. But yes, ultimately, I take responsibility for saying 8.9 million is the figure, because that's the figure we submitted to the GLA as our formal request.
That submission, did that include contingency?
You know, as David mentioned earlier, of course it included bits of project contingency that you would expect in various places dotted across the extensive programme.
Did it include £2 million worth of contingency?
It included £500,000 worth of contingency.
£500,000, thank you very much. Which actually is about what you would include for contingency on a major project, so that seems quite sensible. How much did, of course, when the Mayor took over, he asked you to stop doing things, didn't he? And to what extent did that affect the outturn?
That had a significant effect in terms of our outturn this year.
A significant effect?
Yes, because during the course of the review, a lot of our activity was delayed pending the outcome of the review.
Can I just add to a point that Doug made a moment ago, and sort of unintended consequences, but the subject of us pausing some of the work actually resulted in DFT then realising that the work was quite important, taking it forward themselves. So one of the consequences, if you like, of us pausing work, particularly on overstation development viability, was that DFT picked up the work themselves. And that's
all of it? Was that they picked up all the work and replaced all the underspend that you would have that was incurred?
No, we're still working very closely with them on various aspects of the work, but what they did was undertook to do viability work on overstation development, which, as I say, at the outset, prior to us engaging them on the subject, they were not prepared to do.
I think that's a really important point, because as a corporation, we're not here to solve all the problems, but what we are here to do is to drive forward others and influence. And over the course of the last 2 years, as Doug says, we've got from a position where DFT was sort of go away, we're not even considering the idea of overstation development or adjacent station development, to actually it might be quite a good idea and we'd like to do our own technical viability, which they're now doing. So that's, you know, that is definitely one of the efficiencies that we've been able to achieve. And part of the reason it was sort of set up is to make that influence through to government departments as we've been doing. But of course it's not all the savings, but you know, it's not insignificant.
So you originally budgeted for 8.9 million, you now have a budget of 6.9 million with something that is or is not contingency. And so coming down from 8.9 million down to 6.9 million, what is it that you will not be doing that you had intended to do before?
There are, I guess, two main areas where we had to look closely at things. One was the Regeneration and Partnerships Directorate. That no longer exists, and we've allocated some of the activities to other parts of OPDC, but we're also in discussion with the GLA about further shared services so that they can assist us in delivering some of that work. The other main area is in bringing forward development, whereas David's mentioned already, our focus is on Old Oak North, but if we simply forget about Old Oak South, in our view, the harder to deliver public sector sites, which are primarily located in the south, may not be brought forward as quickly or indeed at all. So that's the key focus for looking at this additional 2 million to ensure that that work's not compromised.
Possibly add something on this. Starting with the regeneration side, you'll be aware there is a significant regeneration resource within, I won't say within City Hall, they're based in Union Street. They share the same office space as the OPDC and already doing a lot of work in the Old Oak area. For example, they're the team behind the Park Royal Employment Atlas, which was a door-to-door survey of exactly what's going on with businesses there. That team is available to offer support and help on a shared service arrangement with the OPDC, as is the Economic and Business Policy Unit here, who can also help with business support and, for example, following up on the setting up of trade associations or business improvement districts. So the OPDC already has an amazing history of being involved in shared services, and one of the recommendations in my review under point 7 was about exploring this further and making sure that we can drive out even further efficiencies by doing this. So those conversations are happening now between Victoria's team and the regeneration people, for example, about how this shared service arrangement can work.
Well, I think that's an important point, that we don't really want to reinvent the wheel, and we want to, you know, I'm an ex-employee of the GLA, so I know the expertise that's in the building. I selfishly want as much of it as possible, please. It's sort of all hands to the deck, because this is an important project. It's early days, but those conversations have now started about how we can utilise that resource.
I do like it when people use words I don't understand, yes, but it's very good. Very good. I'll look that one up later as well. And of course, Assembly members who've been on here a while will know about the success that we've had, the marvellous success that we've had in the GLA on the shared services front.
Can I mean,
are you aware of the marvellous success that we've had in the GLA on the shared services front?
Well, I tell you what I am aware of. We're a functional body of the GLA. And, you know, David's quoted a long list in front of him, and I can just say that every single service that we could possibly share, ranging from press officers to IT, to HR, to finance, to secretariat. The guy sat next to you at the moment, his team run all of our committee services for us. Every single service that we could possibly share, we do. So yes, I am aware of the fantastic success, and it's sitting here in front of you now. We're the exemplar functional body for shared services, and we're the benchmark that others should follow.
Yeah. You would be on your own, actually, in terms of being...
somebody's got to lead it, and that's what we're doing.
Absolutely.
We're waiting for the others to follow.
May I say, Miss Hill, I'm
always optimistic.
I'm extremely impressed with what's happened on the OPDC so far, bearing in mind the complexity of the site. We're at a very, very early stage of the redevelopment of the site, of this regeneration area, and I'm impressed how far we actually have come. I'm just a bit worried that whether or not Mr. Bellamy, the Mayor, is really serious about this site. If we see the prospect of the development of the South moving further into the future, and that the Regeneration Partnership Directorate, which was going to be fully focused on getting this regeneration to work, has now been abolished. How can we judge whether or not the Mayor is serious when he holds back such an important regeneration project to London?
The Mayor isn't holding back the project at all. The Mayor is doing his job by the London taxpayer to ensure that the work is delivered in the most value for money way possible. And we're ensuring that, I hear what you say about shared services in the past. I think there's a lot that can be done and OPDC have very much shown how it can be done to work better together across the group and collaborate and both learn from each other, but also drive out efficiencies. And we're absolutely determined to do that, and absolutely determined to get different parts of the group working together. And what we've seen through this budget process is in parallel the development of homes for Londoners, and as that work is being done, it's that enables us to make some of the savings here in the OPDC budget and establish what will be a real centre of excellence that not just OPDC but all functional bodies can call on for housing and land matters.
Do you regret, Mr. Bellamy, or does the Mayor regret rejecting the initial professional advice that was given to him regarding how much the OPDC required?
No.
Do you regret calling the £2 million contingency, bearing in mind you seem to have indicated to me, and do correct me if I'm wrong, you seem to have indicated to me today that it will need that contingency irrespective of any underspend. It will need that money in order to be viable.
No, it is, the £2 million is contingent on the case being made for its use. As I say, we expect it will be, but that work is yet to be completed. And what that is about is the long-term viability of OPDC and how we develop the site. Let's be clear that we're talking here about a development programme in which something, if I remember rightly, about 20% of the homes and a third of the jobs are currently scheduled for delivery after 2036. So this is an incredibly large, complex, long-term scheme, and what really matters now is about how we find a way to get a sustainable long-term finance for OPDC to enable that to happen.
So are you effectively saying that the case for redeveloping the southern part of the site has not yet been made?
The question is not about the case for it. I think clearly there's a piece of land there that is going to be proximate to a very important train station, and so there is a very strong case for doing it. The challenge is working out how one finances that, which is the reason why we need to go back to government and have those negotiations. It's great that the Memorandum of Understanding stops the land being sold off, and so a strategic view can be taken, but we need to ensure that that land can be developed in a way that is right for Londoners and not just filled with super expensive luxury flats.
Well, hopefully that was never in the plan, was it, Mr. Bellamy, to just having super expensive luxury flats?
Well, I think obviously the planning is the planning is clearly working forward, but there are certain, if you accept a situation where the GLA group fundamentally has to fund the infrastructure costs that are needed for the site, and they can be quite significant, then there's an inevitability about with no other sources of funding. How do you recoup that? And the only way that ultimately you can recoup that is from the sale values of the property on the site, and that's the fundamental challenge. And to try and drive forward and get the affordable housing that London so desperately needs, we have to, we have to get the financing mechanism right, and that's both about the self-financing work that OPDC are looking at, and it's also about those negotiations with the government.
And I'd just like to add to that, you'll know in the review there was a very clear recommendation that we should put together a comprehensive ask to government for some of that infrastructure support. And it's no secret that Ebbsfleet up until last year only had about 350 homes on site. Then it got an infrastructure fund from government, and now they're on track to deliver several thousand homes as starts by 2020. So it's putting that sort of compelling case together. A station coming on its own is not enough. We've had a high-speed one station at Ebbsfleet that sat there for 5-6 years, not a lot going on. So it needs that extra support, and really the charge is on us to pull together that very compelling case for government as to why some essential infrastructure funding might be needed in the mix, in addition to all of the other support that the GLA group is going to provide.
Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Duval.
Isn't part of that more sustainable funding is around the memorandum of understanding with the Department of Transport? When are we going to resolve both the land issues there with them and also plug in the gap on the infrastructure funding? Isn't that key? What's the timescale? Who's leading negotiations? I need very quick and concise answers on those.
So very quick and concise answers. The Mayor has written, as he has said to the Assembly before, has written to the Secretary of State expressing that the memorandum of understanding is not the appropriate financial basis to proceed. The new chair, when in post, will be the person tasked with leading those negotiations, recognising that, as well as a transport matter, this is a matter of huge interest to DCLG, given their role in housing and development, and also the Treasury.
We need to see progress really by the end of the calendar year.
And that could lead to speeding up some of the processes. I know 2036, but that could be accelerated in some ways if we get good negotiations on issues like that.
Just to be clear, there are some sites that will be work sites for HS2 that will stay work sites until the mid-2030s.
Either that or the work sites will make it challenging to develop because of their location. But, absolutely, we get the right deal and we crack on.
Thank you for that. Another quick, concise issues. MDCs or delivery vehicles such as Old Oak come in different shapes and sizes. It seems to me that you're doing something more than just a shared services agreement in terms of working here. How can we be assured as Assembly members that the infrastructure here, in terms of receiving requests from Old Oak Common, or the going forward together, because it's not just Old Oak MDC here, there's a transport issues and transport debates as well, in terms of my colleague outlined. How can we be assured that we will meet the request in a timely and proper way, i.e. that much that the Mayor takes the ownership of the MDC, the officer cadre will have all sorts of priorities to deal with. How do we service Old Oak Common in the most efficient and effective way? And how are we going to resolve issues of difference, if there are issues of difference?
I think my colleague Mr Bellamy has outlined at the beginning the clear priorities. Those are signed up to by both City Hall and the Mayoral Development Corporation. If you cast your mind back to when we originally set this up and we came in front of you with some of the options we considered, the area is at the corner of 3 boroughs, and in order to get 3 boroughs to work collaboratively together, there are other options, but we felt that the MDC model was the way of getting everybody signed up to the objectives, the priorities, and to some local planning processes that make it easy. The Mayor has taken his time to run a very transparent and exhaustive process, really, to come up with a new chair. And that person will work very closely with City Hall and their officer group in Old Oak to make sure that we remain aligned on these priorities, and that particularly on issues of lobbying, for example, where the Mayor needs to be in contact with the Secretary of State for Transport on some key issues, that we're all saying the same message at our various layers of contact with government. And that has worked very well for the recent history of the MDC, and I see no reason for it not to, especially under the new chair's leadership.
Thank you.
You have finished. Assembly Member Devonish.
Going back to Assembly Member Boff's question, has the new chairman indicated to you that the overall financial envelope, we can argue over the amount of the contingency, but let's not, may need to increase to facilitate the step change required, mentioning the points particularly Dr Sahato and Assembly Member Pidgeon made on the NHS and early years, for example?
I think the proposed new chair, bearing in mind to say it's not at a point where we've been able to announce and invite the Assembly to hold their confirmation hearing. We're not at the stage where the proposed chair would be looking in detail at budgets and really have their heads around all the variables. What I would say is that clearly in making the nomination, the Mayor is looking for a very strong, very effective chair who will help us work very closely together. And absolutely, if the chair comes back and says, well, right, I think to move this forward, the following things are needed, then that would be advice that would be taken very seriously.
So hopefully in the third quarter of the year you will be coming back and saying the step change is required once this person is in place.
So if we will be implementing the budget, we will be getting the proposal for the self-financing, and should the chair identify that additional help is needed, and of course that may not be direct financial help, it may be more time here or from Transport for London or whatever, then that chair absolutely will be empowered to work with the relevant people to make that happen.
And very briefly, Victoria, can you confirm there was no luxury housing in the current scheme at the moment, to take the point that the Chief of Staff made earlier?
Needs to be a one-word answer.
Can I confirm there's no luxury housing in the current schemes?
Yes.
Mix? I mean, there's a mix of housing, that's what I can confirm.
All right, time up. Fourth table question, Assembly Member Berry.
So this question is in relation to engagement with Londoners and taking the local community with us on this journey. It's not just for us to take with them, it's HS2, everybody who's doing something at Old Oak and Park Royal is very much at the heart of everything we do. We have sought to be exemplar right from the get-go. And our engagement team indeed are based in co-work space out at North Acton. So they're there on the ground day in, day out. We have our model there. There's an open door policy. Anyone from the public can walk in, have a look, ask them anything they want. So we do have an extensive engagement programme. It's multifaceted. And if I may, I just want to start with the local plan engagement, and then there are other aspects to it. So throughout the planning process, we're committed to engaging with local communities, business, residents, on this significant regeneration opportunity. And we have been proactive, but of course we listen to local communities as well, and you'll note there are recommendations in the review relating to that. And in listening to it, we've just taken through the board last week a revised community statements, a statement of community involvement, so that we're upping the game now in terms of what developers are going to be required to do and not do. Because it's fair to say on our first strategic scheme, we entrusted a developer to run an engagement process, and it wasn't really up to the scratch that we would want. So going forward now, we're taking a much more proactive role in ensuring that they carry out 2 stages of consultation, and of course that it's meaningful and an authentic engagement. Any applications that we're involved in determining going forward, we'll take that. Just on the local plan, we've had, over the course of not even 2 years, so we're not 2 years old yet, but we've had 15 public engagement events. We've had nearly 3,000 responses to our first stage local plan consultation, so there's lots of interest. Raising some 7,000 issues, which the team have been sort of chewing through over the last year, with a view to getting it out to second stage consultation. And we're very open to ideas. As the local planning authority, not even 2 years in existence, we'd be the first to say we don't have the decades of experience that local planning authorities do have, but we are working hand in hand with the borough planning officers. Wider than just the local plan, of course, we have an engagement team who meet regularly with the boroughs, Hammersmith and Fulham, Ealing and Brent.
Sorry, I haven't got a great deal of time. Can you focus on community engagement rather than the boroughs, if that's okay?
community engagement rather than the boroughs. So I was just coming on to say regular meetings with Hammersmith Society, the Grand Union Alliance, umbrella organisation for all of these organisations, the prison, Wells House Group, resident group. There's an important point there. I took a decision as Chief Executive that I wanted to put a resident on the board. No other development corporation has ever done that before. Some thought it was a good idea, some didn't. But that resident and local business rep on the board as well played a very active role in engaging with the communities and representing their views in our public board meetings. Further, on the 31st of January, I hosted a public forum in the evening. We had over 60 local residents, many new faces coming. In the same day that afternoon, we invited in all of the CVSs, the community voluntary sector groups from Ealing, Hammersmith and Brent to come in because of to talk with us, to start the conversation, because of course they already know what the local community needs, so we don't want to reinvent or duplicate all of their very clear strategies, actions, priorities. And so we're in the process of pulling together an MOU so that we can work with those CVSs going forward. We work with a diverse set of organisations, people like Brent Firm Foundation, a youth organisation. Youth engagement is very important with us, but we're not doing it in a vacuum. We're doing it with this building. It's a rich experience from the GLA's social inclusion team, for Events for London, for the volunteering team London, the education team's culture, to really look at how we can tap into their engagement. And there are existing ways of doing that. So there's a lot of work going on, but it is very early days.
Can I possibly, thank you very much for that. That actually does cover a couple of my other questions, things like having a resident on the board. I think that's a really interesting thing that you're doing there. I've also been looking at the work of the Grand Union Alliance, and again, they're doing a great job. They seem to have influenced the statement of community involvement quite a lot in terms of getting the ground rules put in and things like that. Yeah. Can I ask though, my question is, what changes have been made to the plans as a result of the community engagement? You've talked a lot about the process, but in what ways have you changed things as a result?
Well, I think a lot of the those 7,000 issues that I've mentioned that have been raised predominantly from the local community, we're taking on board. So it's across the local plan policy area, particularly. We've been challenged on the issue of delivering more family housing. So that's a point that we take very seriously, looking at how you can achieve more family homes. So by that I mean 3+ units, which a lot of regen projects have struggled to deliver. And that is absolutely influencing. And I think also on provision of health and education, for sure the local community have had an influence on policy development, but it's often the case that the views that they bring are absolutely in alignment with the Mayor's priorities in any event. So we've had direct influence on that. We've had direct influence, as I cited earlier, a big area of change is we've actually revised our statement of community involvement, which is a statutory document which took on board the fact they didn't think engagement was proactive enough. And we've changed it to ensure that it's much more extensive going forward, with the onus being on the developers to deliver that for us.
Okay. The Grand Union Alliance, they're currently funded by UCL's Governing the Future City grant programme, but this runs out at the end of 2017. Is there anything either the OPDC or the GLA can do to help ensure they continue to get independent funding to carry on their work?
Well, I think that's certainly something we'll take away and have a look at. I was unaware that their funding ran out at the end of this year, and coming into this role, setting up the corporation, it was a delight to find that not only there were a plethora of groups, they were actually organised under this umbrella organisation, and that's a real dream scenario for engagement because the community are already organised and ready to go. So absolutely, if they're not going to be funded, then we will explore what options are available with the GLA for support that could draw upon a whole variety of funding sources that I'm not going to claim to be an expert on. But yes, that's something we'll have a look at.
Okay, great. And finally, obviously, things like having a statement of community involvement, doing this level of engagement because you're producing a local plan, that's a statutory requirement for you. But it seems like there's been quite a lot of benefits to the development from what you're doing. Would you recommend this to other large development sites? And how much of what you do is is costly? How much would you say is possible to do on a much smaller site, say at the level of an estate or something like that?
Well, I mean, our starting point is always to try and get the developer to fund as much authentic engagement as we can. So, and to keep down the cost to the London taxpayer. I mean, clearly we have officer resource, we're a resourced planning team, and it does take a lot of their time working alongside, but that's rightly so. So I don't think it has to be costly, and I think digital provides an amazing platform opportunity to do more engagement. We certainly utilise Facebook, LinkedIn, we utilise Twitter. You know, and whatever your views are on that, we get a lot of traction with that, and you know, it helps us to engage through youth as well who use this. We've got our own vlog channel on YouTube. Please do look at it. Yesterday's vlog with the Chief Planner at DCLG went live last night. I mean, genuinely, these are local residents want to see that there's this interest, and you know, the conversations of people we take around the site.
And you'd recommend that, you know, most developers of reasonably sized sites could manage that level of engagement?
We're doing it on a pretty low budget, so I don't see, you know, for in terms of, you know, the planning engagement, we're not spending anywhere near the sorts of sums Battersea is spending, for example, on their scheme. You don't need to spend millions on it. You just need to do it right.
Thank you very much.
Yes. I'm afraid I neglected to mention that we were visited by the pupils of St Paul's Cray Church of England Primary School, Bromley. They were clearly so stimulated by the meeting, they've gone out to do some good works. Assembly Member Shah.
Thank you, Chair. Will community infrastructure levy and planning agreements be sufficient to deliver substantial amount of social infrastructure that will be required for the development?
Do you want me to answer that one? It's, okay, so SIL is obviously a really powerful tool for, as local planning authority. We at the same time we consult on the local plan, we'll be consulting on that SIL, and we've got a position agreed with the boroughs in terms of what's the right level, and you know, it does raise a significant contribution towards it. But as you all know, government are currently considering the role of SIL and how that sort of pans out going forward. So we still see Section 106 as a really quite powerful tool to require developers to provide some of the infrastructure. Will it deliver everything? I think it's fair to say we've been very open and transparent that the overall infrastructure pot that we identify through the DIF, it cannot be met with SIL. It's probably about a third of it overall, and some of those infrastructure requirements in any event are sort of longer term, and maybe things that could be sort of stripped out. So we'll go through that prioritisation. But the actual immediate community requirements through SIL, yes, we're confident, because if a developer can't deliver the support to health or education that they should be through the development that they're delivering, then I think our planning committee will be taking a view as to whether or not that development should come forward in its current form or not. Will it deliver all of the wider bridges in and out? Will it deliver forward front funding on energy, power centres? No, it's not going to do all of that. We've been very open on that from the start, but it will deliver what it's required to for communities. And if it doesn't, you know, that's going to, of course, be challenging for our committee.
Well, I mean, that's really, you know, very concerning, because looking at one of the biggest regeneration projects, and you'll have major important areas to deliver in terms of you've got school expansions, you'll have the sort of medical facilities, you've got community facilities, and we've not even talked about the cultural package, which, you know, the mayor is very keen to deliver across London. And obviously for major developments such as this, it will be crucial that you find funding, additional funding beyond which will be required, beyond SIL or Section 106 or whatever, to deliver those projects. Because without that, you know, you would not have a sustainable neighbourhood, sustainable community.
I think the mayor was very, you know, the review, of OPDC was very clear that a very, you know, strong case must be put to fill the gap. And it's, if I may, it's not unusual for large regeneration sites on brownfield land to have a funding gap. And you know, any of the large sites that you look around London, this is not a new or novel or contentious. What you have to do is prioritise infrastructure to deliver the most deliver what your priority is. And here the priority is to get some early delivery of homes away. So that's where we'll be focusing our efforts. You know, whilst the wider infrastructure study has identified, you know, a whole host of infrastructure that's required in the long, medium and short, medium and long term. I think what we're very openly saying is it's not all funded, but that is, you know, that's the same for any major regen scheme. You've got to put together a package of support over a number of years. And I'm not saying we can't get the immediate housing away. Absolutely, I'm not. That's our focus in Old Oak North, those 20,000 homes. But we must put that compelling case to government as to why we might need a bit of help with upfront infrastructure.
Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Copley.
Thank you. I've found a bit of time, so I want to come back to the land value tax question. Perhaps Doug could give me the answer he was going to give me earlier on would it be beneficial in terms of raising finance for the project, and also would it accelerate the delivery of new homes?
Yes, certainly. I think it fits very well with the last question. We're actively looking at all sorts of sources of funding to make this work in the best possible way. So we've been in discussions with TfL over the work they've done, and they've recently produced their report on land capture ideas. Obviously, I've read your report as well, and would welcome the opportunity to discuss it further with you, because we know it's essential in one way or another to capture some of the significant land value uplift that there will be in the area.
Excellent.
Can I just add to that,
Yes.
Senator Copley, and say that the Mayor strongly believes that a land value tax has the potential to really help with sharing fairly the gain that arises from major infrastructure investments and thus enable them to be built. He's been lobbying the Chancellor extensively on this matter, and we would like to see a trial. We need to decide where the most appropriate place to do that, but we very much would like to work with the Treasury on that. I think the Chancellor has listened to the Mayor, and within half an hour the Chancellor will be on his feet in the budget, and I think we'll bite our nails a little bit and see what he has to say.
I look forward to seeing if there's anything in there on that. Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Russell.
For the Chief Executive, will you meet with Will Norman, the Mayor's Walking and Cycling Commissioner, to discuss how Old Oak Common can meet the Mayor's Healthy Streets objectives, which include working for a diverse range of Londoners?
Short answer, yes.
Thank you.
Be delighted to do so.
Assembly Member Gavron.
Yes, this is a question I was out of time on, I'd like to ask. During the last mayoralty, there was a general perception that Old Oak and Park Royal would probably be a rather dull development with residential units and commercial units and so on, but that it wouldn't really have a star attraction. Now, there's been a lot of talk about Queen's Park Rangers going there, a stadium-led regeneration, everything from casinos to concert halls. And recently there were press reports on a study you were doing, I'll ask Victoria, on I think it was called something like primary purposes, but anyway, how to make Old Oak and Park Royal a destination. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, the work we've done is a precursor to the master plan. It's called Catalyst Uses, and it's trying to come up with some sound principles about what might be appropriate or not appropriate in sort of ballpark terms. Because as you rightly identified, lots of people are coming up with lots of great ideas, some not so great, because there aren't many big sites in London. So if you've got an idea to put something big somewhere, you're looking in 2 or 3 sites, and Old Oak's definitely on the list. And so before we appoint the team of master planners, which is imminent, we wanted to have a good sort of sound basis for them to do that. That work is nearing completion, and we'll be feeding that into the master planning team. And I would imagine you would want to see a copy of that, the Catalyst Uses report. And we should really make that public, so I'll commit that we do that.
Sorry, so there is a report and it should be made public, yes?
That's what I'm saying. It's no secrets in there. It's just talking about what sort of catalyst uses would be appropriate and not appropriate in this sort of location. And we take it really seriously. It's a very special site because of all these connections, and the sort of catalyst use you put in there sets a benchmark, sets the tone. So there's a real responsibility to get that right.
To Assembly members.
Well, I think we'll publish it. I can't tell you exactly today when we're going to publish it, but we will circulate that link through or send you hard copies or whatever you like.
And does it include how you would go about consulting with the existing residents and also some of those to come in, but also residents who live adjacent to OPDC? Because it's clearly very important that they understand what's coming and that there's some feedback on that and you get some community cohesion.
The catalyst uses study doesn't, but the master plan team who are being appointed, that was one of the criteria we've scored them against. It's not just about consulting with the community that are there, it's the wider community. So they will be carrying out extensive engagement. The challenge for us is how we dovetail that in with the local plan engagement so that everybody doesn't get confused about what engagement is for what, when and where.
Okay,
right,
thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all our guests for coming and answering the questions. I'm particularly pleased that a word was used, exegesis, which I don't think even the last mayor dared to use in this august place. Thank you very much for coming. Will the Assembly please agree the motion set out in my name, that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked? Thank you so much. We now have a petition from Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Thank you, Chair. This motion is on behalf of residents in Streatham. They are calling for the A23 through Streatham High Road to be made safer, more people-centred space, and to end the exceptionally high death and injury rate on the road and return it to being a truly community street. There are over 459 signatures on this, including a longer list of signatures on a change.org online signature. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Will you please agree to forward this petition to the Mayor? Thank you. Right, we now come on to motions. Now there are 10 motions and I'd like us to deal with them really as briskly as possible. No repetition. I want really the rules of just a minute to apply here. And can I say, I do wonder whether or not there is an abuse of process, having so many motions set down. I'm a great believer in democracy, but democracy means that these things should be properly aired, and I don't think we can if we're going to have 10 motions on each occasion. Anyway, the first motion is in the name of Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. I want to share a story about an Uber driver. Abdazak Hadi is one of the drivers who took Uber to an industrial tribunal where it was ruled that Uber drivers are not self-employed. It's a desperately sad story and very timely. Abdazak's 10-year-old son has leukemia. Sadly, his child's condition has deteriorated into a relapse. He is hospitalised. And his parents have been told that there is no more conventional treatment possible and only experimental treatments are available. Abduzak works for Uber and is the only breadwinner in his family. He is also a current claimer for workers' rights. If his rights were respected, he might now be able to take some paid leave, paternity leave perhaps, maybe even sick leave. Instead, right now, he is off work to support his child in hospital. He has no income, but continues to have to pay rent on his vehicle. He said, and I quote, "Today it's me, tomorrow it could be some other private hire driver." So maybe by sharing this, things could change for the better. An ill child needs their father at their bedside, not having to work up to 90 hours on the streets of London for a minimum wage. I was also contacted by James Farrar on behalf of the United Private Hire Drivers, who told me that in 2014, Uber testified before the London Assembly Transport Committee to say that, that London's minicab business model is one that is exploitative of drivers. Since then, conditions have gone from bad to worse. Many report only being able to take a break after working 30 hours to cover their overheads. And James went on to say, and I quote, "We will be grateful and humbled if the London Assembly acknowledges our plight and calls for reform." Now, I'm going to continue letting Uber drivers make the case here. There's one more quote from Jamal Hussain and Mohammed Rahman. And they say, in recent years, we have seen working conditions gradually reach a crisis point. We and many others work excessively long hours to earn less than the minimum wage. We have no security. It is our hope this motion will finally move the Mayor and TfL to take action to end the exploitation of publicly licensed private hire drivers. What these drivers are telling us is that in the case of Uber, the bottom is falling out of the labour market. People's basic employment rights, like a guaranteed minimum wage, holiday pay and occupational safety, are being eroded. Workers' rights have been hard won across generations of campaigners and activists, so it is really distressing to see the clock turned back like this. The gig economy just doesn't work for people like Mr. Haddy, who needs full-time, steady employment and security. Instead, the gig employment is resulting in sweated labour. The Central London Employment Tribunal judged that Uber drivers are indeed workers who are entitled to employment rights. This is not just an issue of workers' rights, but also an issue of safety. Tired drivers shouldn't feel that they have no choice but to keep working to make ends meet. And people using licensed transport should be able to have the confidence that the driver isn't overworked or risking their safety. This motion, just to be clear, is not about the numbers of private hire vehicles on our streets, which add to congestion. That is a separate issue that the Mayor needs to address by lobbying government for the power to cap the number of private hire licences that are granted. This motion is specifically about workers' rights and their security. The Mayor has already taken steps to introduce a higher starting salary for bus drivers. He wants Transport for London, union reps and bus operators to introduce a London-wide pay structure that would set out minimum levels of pay for bus drivers with 3 and 5 or more years of experience. The Mayor now needs to make life better for private hire drivers, and by securing doing this by securing the powers from government to make workers' rights a condition of all future operator licensing. He would really help drivers like Mr. Haddy to have a fairer, more secure and better paid employment and ensure that passengers receive a better service. I urge all members to support this motion.
Assembly Member Eshalomi.
I'll be brief, Chair. I think, again, this landmark decision highlights the whole business model of the technology-driven industry, which I think it's good, you know, we all support and sign up to it, but ultimately we need to make sure that workers are protected and they should be entitled to those minimum basic employment rights. The notion put forward by Uber that their drivers are self-employed is something that should be challenged and was challenged. And in essence, it's very misleading, because the reality is those drivers don't set the pay for the fees. They're not able to negotiate with passengers in terms of where they pick up and drop off. All of that's controlled by Uber through the technology app. I think it's right that we highlight the work by the GMB pro-union drivers in terms of pushing this case and supporting their members and all the other new unions who've supported those drivers. The ban of self-employment does lead to employers shirking their rights in terms of sick pay, minimum wage for their staff, and a massive tax revenue loss to the taxpayers as well. That's something that we should highlight. So I'd urge all members to support this motion, continue to support those drivers who provide a valuable service for Londoners. Thank you.
Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to support this motion today. Very interesting report from Frank Field, where he did an extensive investigation into the working conditions of Uber drivers and found many were being paid as little as £2 an hour. That's less than a third of the national living wage. And in this ruling from the Central London Employment Tribunal, they were absolutely right. They actually said, the judges, the notion that Uber in London is a mosaic of 30,000 small businesses linked by a common platform is to our minds faintly ridiculous. And I think many of us would agree with those sentiments. And the Mayor has made a commitment in his manifesto to strive to make London a living wage city in which all workers are paid fairly. And that it must include private hire drivers. You know, Frank Field's report also really highlighted that drivers are doing 12-hour shifts a day, some working 7 days a week. And when you've saturated the market as they have, and they've increased the percentage take that the Uber corporate take, workers are having to do more and more hours just to sort of keep at the same sort of level of pay and make ends meet. And if somebody is working 70, 80, 90 hours a week, they are not fit to drive. They are at risk of causing injury to not only themselves, but also to passengers and other road users. You know, there are a number of safety issues that do need to be addressed around the use of apps, and I've raised that previously with the Mayor. But this much needed safety measure to protect these workers, also making sure that operators can't literally have a sweatshop in the conditions of their employees, is really important, not only for the protection of drivers, but also for the safety of passengers in London.
Assembly Member Bailey.
Members, I don't want my comments to be seen as a defence of Uber. I think Uber's business model needs to be looked at. But the gig economy in London, the vibrant labour market we've had in London has been a major driver of our economic success. And the story that Assembly Member Rushell's told us is very tragic, and I really hope that that is a common occurrence. But I would say this, I come from a very poor community, and what our community really valued was flexible employment for a number of reasons. Many of us had childcare issues, we were carers, we had another job that being able to quickly dip in and out of other work was vital to our survival. And taking on Uber in this way seems like the right thing to do, and long may it happen, but we need to be careful about what is the next step from this. What happens next? Who else do we stop? Which part of the labour market do we take the flexibility away from and effectively prevent poorer workers having that second job? Having two jobs is not pleasurable, but it's often the difference between survival and not. So that's the only reason I feel like I cannot support this motion.
Assembly Member Curtin.
So, Chair, yeah, I'm happy to support this motion. The gig economy and 0 hours contracts were words we hadn't heard of 10 years ago. It's a problem which has almost taken us by surprise and grown and grown. And it does affect particularly private hire vehicle operators in London, of which they're and drivers. And I believe there are nearly 120,000 vehicle licences for private hire vehicles at the moment. About 3,000 licences for operators. Some of them are very honourable in what they do, but the biggest operator with the greatest number of drivers is, of course, Uber. I understand that they're registered for tax in the Netherlands, and they make a lot of money, in some cases, by not paying. The system that they use doesn't allow for the drivers to get a decent wage. We need to look at different industries on a case-by-case basis. This would allow the Mayor to have the power to just grant operating licences to those operators who do provide a good deal to the drivers that work in their care. But the government actually needs to look on this on a national scale, to look into the whole issue of the gig economy, 0 hours contracts. Where it's good, they initially started for high-end professionals, but the 0 hours contract idea in the gig economy has moved down to people who are on the minimum wage and now less than the minimum wage. It's something that needs to be tackled to make sure that everyone gets a fair wage for their work. So I will support this motion. Thank you.
Do you want to sum up, Assembly Member Russell?
Just very briefly, I've been very heartened by everything I've heard in the Chamber this morning. I think it's really important that the Mayor does have the right, the power to make workers' rights a condition of all future operator licensing, and therefore I hope everyone will support the motion.
Those in favour of the motion, please show.
11, that's 16.
Okay. Anyone against? Motion is carried. Next motion is in the name of Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Thank you very much. When we look at Crossrail 2, we shouldn't forget the history of Crossrail itself. Crossrail, the term, first emerged back in 1974 in the London Rail Study Report, so 43 years ago. So from first being proposed, it's taken, 45 odd years for it to, will have taken 45 years for it to actually open. So we saw delays on these transport projects in the 80s and 90s, and that cannot be repeated for Crossrail 2. And this is not just a London project, which I get tired of hearing from Whitehall. It benefits so much further than London, and right from Hampshire to East Anglia, literally from the Solent to the Wash. And I think many of us have started to hear rumours that actually the enthusiasm for Crossrail 2 is waning, and some people question whether High Speed 2 and Crossrail 2 can be afforded at the same time. But the reality is these projects go hand in hand. Delaying Crossrail 2 is absolutely not an option. And as the motion highlights, the absence of Crossrail 2 would lead to passengers at Euston, having come on High Speed 2, facing immense crowding pressures and time delays, undermining the benefits of High Speed 2. And we all know the experience already of stations having to close on the Victoria line, Euston, Victoria, King's Cross and so on. Crossrail 2 has got cross-party support. There's no divide. The current mayor, the previous mayor absolutely support it. But there is something that needs to be done now. We have got to put the pressure on to ensure that this long-term project becomes a reality, and a reality within years rather than decades. And I really hope we can pass this motion unanimously to show the importance of Crossrail 2 for London's growth, for the UK's growth actually as a whole, but also to ensure London and Londoners and wider passengers can keep moving. Thank you.
Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Just to agree with everything my colleague Caroline Pigeon just mentioned there, and I think the reality is there is a lot of support cross-party for Crossrail, and I wouldn't want people to feel that this is just a London-centric argument, but essentially when London thrives, the rest of the country thrives. The all-party parliamentary group in London have got their full support behind this. It's a cross-party group, and it's important that a number of councils, a number of councillors, a number of businesses across not just London realise the potential and benefits of Crossrail. So we're definitely asking the government, continue to support this. We do need the funds. London continues to grow. London continues to be the heartbeat. And on the back of Brexit, it's important that we have infrastructure projects like Crossrail to keep London open and London moving. So I'd urge you all to support this motion. Thank you.
Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just a couple of words to say that from the Merton and Wandsworth perspective, that this project could not be more important in terms of going ahead. I'm not the only person here, I'm sure, who comes to City Hall using or trying to use the Northern Line, and the relief of the congestion on that line for Londoners and for those who are travelling into London from outside of London is absolutely critical. And that is merely just pointing out the situation as it affects people in Merton and Wandsworth and people trying to travel through Merton and Wandsworth. The line is just as important as it crosses London and goes up to the north as well. So I would really hope that everybody here is going to support this and that the government is going to give this the green light as soon as possible so that we can start to move ahead on something that is going to take a considerable period to build, and we're already suffering immense overcrowding. We need this as soon as possible. Thank you.
Those in favour of the motion, please show.
10, 12, 13, that's 20.
Okay. Anyone against? Right. Motion carried. NEMCON. Next motion is in the name of Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you very much indeed. This is about the Dubs Amendment, and I think the government's failure to shoulder its fair share of vulnerable children fleeing conflict is disappointing, but perhaps not unexpected. And by accepting just over 1/10 of the children set out in Lord Dove's original amendment, the government has shown absolute disregard, in my opinion, for vulnerable children beyond our shores. And there's been absolutely cross-party support on this, as you will have seen yesterday in Parliament. London MPs from all parties have been supportive. The Dubs Amendment could act as a pool for human trafficking, it's claimed. It rings hollow when organisations who work with child migrants stress that it would have the opposite effect. UNICEF and Safe Passage have given testimony to the Home Affairs Committee, and they said safe and legal migration routes disrupt the activities of people traffickers, and it's really, really important that we have those safe routes. Children and young people are going missing and being put at serious risk. The government claims that local authorities don't have the capacity, yet there are currently 368 spaces available for unaccompanied minors in the UK, including 23 spaces in Lewisham alone. And I have to say, I'm very proud that London councils have stepped up to the mark. They have led the way in supporting children to escape the humanitarian crisis on our doorstep. 1 in 3 children who have come here have come to London. But I do remain frustrated but the government has refused to engage on this matter. And we know there is capacity there, and I really regret the change of heart of the government with this Dubs amendment. We have a proud history as a country of a good humanitarian response, and as we're repositioning ourselves in the world, are we just going to be so inward looking, or are we going to step up and be on that international stage? I'd have thought the government would want to do that and to have played its proper part. I hope, given that we saw cross-party support yesterday from MPs, that all members will support this motion today.
Okay. Assembly Member McCartney, will you draw the attention, please, of members to the amendment that has been tabled?
Oh yes, I'm so sorry, I forgot to do that.
The mover didn't.
Indeed, the original amendment, I think, stated 750 unaccompanied children. It is, in fact, 350. I want to just say a little bit about the background to this, because this amendment, the Dubs Amendment, came about during the passage of the immigration bill, as it was then, last year. And Lord Dubs called for up to 3,000 children to be rehoused. These are unaccompanied child refugees already in Europe. So not new arrivals, but already in Europe. At the time, the government did not take that amendment, but it agreed to accept another amendment where a specific figure was not put in, but the government accepted an amendment where it agreed to take in a specified number of unaccompanied child refugees from the Calais camps and other points, migration points across Europe. But during the debate, MPs were led to believe that local authorities would be asked to provide for up to 3,000. And that was the belief of members of Parliament across all parties. And that amendment was put through. And then on the 8th of February, which I believe was a Friday afternoon, the government snuck out, in effect, a written statement saying that that specified number would actually be 350. And 200 of those 350 were already in this country. So in effect, the government was saying it would only take another 150 unaccompanied child refugees from elsewhere in Europe. 1 in 3 of those that are already here have already been housed, and they've been housed in London. 1 in 3. So I think London can stand proud that has taken its fair share. But of course, London wants to take more. That's the response from London councils, and Caroline has already mentioned, Lewisham has said that it has offered up at least 20 places, but the government has not taken them up on that offer. And so when this statement came out, there was quite rightly outrage across Parliament from all parties, because it wasn't what was envisaged, neither in terms of the numbers that it was expected to take or the timing. In effect, the scheme's been closed down within 6 months. Caroline's already talked about the pull factor, and the government's saying this is a pull factor, but actually this scheme only relates to children that are already in before the 30th of March last year, so it doesn't apply to children coming in after that date. And I have to make the point that no parent would readily risk their child unless they saw there was no alternative to this route. And the House Home Affairs Select Committee has recently taken evidence and published a report which has really debunked the myth of this pull factor. Caroline's already talked about the lack of evidence of the lack of local authority capacity. And I think we should also note with extreme cynicism that the government last night defeated an amendment put forward by a Conservative Member of Parliament to reveal how many lone child refugees local authorities had the capacity to take. The government was not even prepared to allow Parliament to find out what the capacity actually is for this. Of course, I welcome the assistance this country provides in assistance abroad, for example, through the Syrian Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme, but these schemes will not help children who are already in mainland Europe, who have been separated from family. They have faced experiences no child should ever endure. They're at risk of traffickers, exploitation, abuse, prostitution and slavery. And we should not turn our backs when our councils are saying they can help. And to do so is shameful. And I would urge all members to support this motion.
very much. Assembly Member Dismore.
Thank you, Chair. The government say that will now accept 350 unaccompanied refugee children, well short of the 3,000 Parliament and the country were led to expect would be accepted. In fact, the amendment's not quite right. In fact, we've only actually taken 200, not 350, which is the government's now maximum target. Now, I'm pleased to say that Camden has taken 10 Calais children and Barnet 9, and Camden has 42 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and Barnet has housed 51. But even worse, the Home Office has also said it's ending the separate accelerated arrangement to bring in unaccompanied refugee children who have family links in the UK under the Dublin Convention, and Camden has taken 3 of those already. And it's ludicrous for the Home Secretary to say the scheme incentivised children into making these perilous journeys, when already there are thousands of children in Greece, Italy and France in overcrowded accommodation centres and camps, or are sleeping rough homeless. And so far, not a single child has come to the UK from Greece or Italy under the Dub scheme, but many are eligible to do so, but all are at risk in their current dire circumstances, vulnerable to all kinds of abuse, the prostitution rings, in a return to what can only be described as modern slavery. 50 children a day are already heading back to Calais, despite the clearance of the camps and the efforts of the French authorities to deny them even the basics of life like food, by preventing charities from distributing food and other help. People traffickers and exploitation gangs see them as the easy target they are. And the ending of the scheme will not stop unaccompanied child refugees, it will just stop them coming legally and crucially safely to the safe haven that is Britain. On Thursday, MPs voted in a non-binding vote 254 to 1 in favour of keeping open the Dub scheme and called on the government to continue consulting local authorities over their capacity to take more child refugees. And the irony is that local authorities have said they could actually have the capacity to take more. In their evidence to the House of Commons Home Affairs Committee, they said that they could take a further 4,000 places if additional funding was provided. Mention has been made of Lewisham, who offered to take 23, but in fact have only had 1. Bristol offered to take 10, but haven't decided any. Glasgow offered to take 35, but only received 19. And in Hastings and Rye, the Home Secretary's constituency, there are 48 spaces available, which haven't been taken up. And the irony is, as John has said, that an amendment in Parliament last night, merely to get the government to ask councils about their capacity to take more unaccompanied children, was voted down by the government. Protecting and caring for child refugees has been and must remain a British value. We took the Niños, the 4,000 Basque children who came as unaccompanied refugees from the Spanish Civil War, the kinder transport, where we gave sanctuary to 10,000 predominantly Jewish children from Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland and the Free City of Danzig. And now we have the Dubs Amendment, originally intended to be 3,000 children, far less than those earlier humanitarian efforts in what were at the time more difficult circumstances, yet that is simply too many for this Conservative government. If the government does not even now reconsider this cruel and heartless decision, some of the most helpless children in the world will pay a heavy price for their shrugging the shoulders indifference to their plight.
Assembly Member Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, the Dubs Amendment does sound like a very, very wonderful, heartfelt, compassionate thing. But we all saw pictures on the first day of the Dubs Amendment of child refugees, so-called child refugees, coming into the country. And they were clearly not children, and they were clearly not refugees. Some of them were in their 20s and 30s and have been brought into the country, and we've heard of cases where a person was put into a foster family, said they were 12 years old, and they turned out to be a lot older.
Well,
turned out to be it was a report. It was a report, and
he's lying.
And
that will do. Just because you don't agree with someone doesn't mean that they're lying. In this chamber, we listen to every opinion. We don't have to agree with it.
Thank you. So there were reports that this has happened, and then someone who was a child of the family was put at risk. I've also seen a report that one of the children, so-called children that came over, who was clearly older, was then arrested in Dorset quite recently in a police sting. So there are issues with some of the people who have come over, who have claimed to be child refugees, who clearly aren't. Now, I don't often agree with David Cameron, but what he did was the right thing in saying that we should focus our efforts on child refugees and other refugees in bringing people from the refugee camps in Turkey and Jordan and Lebanon, and also to put money into those camps because we can help 10 to 12 people in those situations for every one person that comes into the United Kingdom. Now, there are 70,000 children in care who are categorised as children who are looked after children in this country. Where do the people go if they come in as child refugees? Do they go to the front of the queue ahead of British children who need that care and are waiting in a long queue to get foster families or adopted families? Or do they go to the back of the queue in an institution, in a home? This whole situation with bringing people from Calais, from countries which are safe countries in the European Union, who should be looking after the child refugees who are genuine child refugees in those countries like France. We need to make sure that those countries live up to their responsibility so we can continue to help people in the refugee camps in Jordan, etc., and for people who are genuine refugees for whom this is the first safe country they come to, then we can help under the United Nations Convention for Refugees, which is our international duty. Thank you.
Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Thank you. I would just say that I think colleagues from UKIP clearly see the world through a very different lens to certainly what I do, and I'm sure other members in the chamber too. As Assembly Member Dismore said, this is actually about British values and this is about vulnerable children, and I really hope the majority of members will support this motion today.
Those in favour of the motion, please show.
19.
Those against? Right. Thank you very much. Motion is carried. Can I please ask that since we have now reached 12:30, that you agree to extend the length of the meeting to deal with the matters outstanding?
Agreed.
Thank you. Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you, Chair. Our motion expresses support for the voting system used to elect all of us to this Assembly. As you'll be aware, and as we can all see by looking around today, the additional member system used for elections to the London Assembly ensures that we reflect the diverse values, beliefs and priorities of London's diverse population. The motion is in response to a backbench bill which is currently scheduled for debate in the House of Commons later this month, which would, if passed, abolish the use of the additional member system here and replace it with first past the post. I think we hopefully all agree the impact of such a change would be to reduce the diversity of the Assembly, excluding a portion of London's voters from fair representation, and in turn harming our ability to hold the Mayor to account on behalf of the voters of London. Additionally, if you look at removing the additional members elected under the PR part of our system from the chamber here, what would actually happen is the number of parties represented would go down from 5 to only 2. It would exclude a quarter of the voters who backed other parties, and it would diminish. It would diminish our ability to act as a representative body. But I don't think it would just change who is elected here. I think it would change how we work as well. I think the diverse voices mean that we actively work to seek consensus on things. And with only 2 parties, the need to do that would be reduced. I strongly suspect it would become here as adversarial as it is in the House of Commons. On International Women's Day, it's also worth noting the evidence that using first past the post in our elections would mean reducing the share of women in the Assembly. At the moment, we are on 40% women. If we were to remove the proportionally elected members, we'd be down to 28%. That would put us below the House of Commons, and I don't think we want to be there. I think in every single country that has more than 40% of women on its parliamentary, primary legislature, they all use PR, and I think it is a really important way of ensuring better representation and better diversity. What the motion calls for is action from the Mayor to reiterate his support for the use of PR for elections to the London Assembly and to the right to the Minister for the Constitution. I hope we'll also help to throw out this bill the next time it comes to Parliament by communicating with the MPs that we know in London and elsewhere to go and turn up and vote against it. I think it'd be a really backward step for London if this went ahead.
Assembly Member Duval.
Formally second, reserve my right to speak during the debate, if there is one.
Has anybody else indicated? It's just you, I'm afraid, Len.
Oh, well, let's move to the vote then.
Okay.
I think everything's been said.
Those in favour of the motion, please show.
16, 17.
Those against?
4.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, is that?
Yes, no.
You've got some votes now. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You can't rig this.
Okay. Right, Assembly Member Arnold.
Chair, thank you very much. Chair, I'm delighted to be proposing this motion today at the London Assembly on International Women's Day itself. Colleagues, despite first being introduced over 100 years ago, International Women's Day is needed more than ever. The past year has seen a significant reversal towards the attitudes of women. We now have a misogynist President of the United States, Donald Trump, who has bragged about groping women's private parts. But closer to home, a member of the Women and Equalities Committee in Parliament, Philip Davis MP, a self-styled champion of men's rights, attempted to filibuster, not for the first time, a bill to prevent and combat violence against women and domestic violence. This is at a time where recently colleagues joined me at a seminar where we, the Assembly, were doing our bit in working with frontline staff, teachers, professionals, social workers, everybody at the front line, to bring an end to female genital mutilation. That is happening in our city. It's not taking the children somewhere else. They are being mutilated here. That's what we're talking about, stopping and combating violence against women and young girls. So this year's International Women's Day theme, Be Bold for Change. Well, this follows on from last year's pledge for parity. It's now about putting those pledges into action. It's a call on everyone to make a bold change to create a more inclusive and equal society, to tackle the challenges that women face every single day, to join together to ensure women can reach their full potential. 40 years since the Equal Pay Act was first introduced, women still earn less than men. At the World Economic Forum, a paper there showed that the gender pay gap across the world is now expected to close in the next century. That's how long we've got to wait. Here in London, the gender gap sits at 11.9%, above the average for the UK, which is 9.4%. But I'm glad to say that in London we have a mayor who calls himself a feminist. And I'm going to be watching him be the feminist that he claims he is. I'm going to watch him use his policies to reduce barriers to women by adopting the highest possible standards. I am looking to see that he is committed to fair play, to equal pensions for women, for good working conditions and gender equality, the inequality that women face in the workplace through pay and discrimination. The mayor is in a position to do something about that. I want us to be in a city that can hold its head up and say, we have done the work and we are proud to be a city that women can stand proud and can achieve their potential. There is, though, work to be done in dealing with the stereotypes and unconscious bias which influence how children think and believe and work their way through life. Phrases such as policeman instead of police officer, that is important. Toys being gendered or coloured-coded, that is important. And the lack of female lead characters on TV. I mean, I hope you're all supportive of the opportunity that we may well have shortly of having the first female Doctor Who. You might say that it's sort of like not important, but it is. Just imagine that as a symbol to young women, you know, in the same way that we are proud that we have now got the first female Commissioner of the Police of London. What a signal are we sending out? When you look at, and I'm proud of the GLA, and I've done the work, when you look now at our functional bodies, I'm proud to be able to say that they are all they're all over 50%. That's achievement and more to come. Now, let me just come and bring myself to a close, Chair. I can see the time. I want us on International Day to be bold for change. I want us to work I want us in our work to highlight the inequality that still exists in this day and age in our city. I want us to pledge our support to women everywhere. I want us to be bold, Chair. Bold. I want us to stand up for equality. Let us do all we can to enable women to achieve their ambitions and reach their full potential. Today, let's call on the Mayor to work with London's businesses, TfL, MPs, to ensure that London is a city in which women are safe from violence and harassment. Colleagues, let's be bold for change and let's give a shout out for International Women's Day. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair, and happy International Women's Day, everyone. And thank you, Jeanette, for inviting me to second your motion. I welcome the call to challenge stereotypes and work towards ending the gender pay gap to allow all women to prosper. The Mayor, as Jeanette has said, has been very vocal about his support for women's rights. And I was really glad to see him on the Women's March, or at the end of the Women's March in January, standing with me and with other campaigners. And I'm also encouraged that he's taking action against misogynist and objectifying adverts on the TfL network in organising his advertising steering group. These unrealistic body shapes feed into damaging stereotypes and put undue focus on physical appearance at the expense of women's abilities, their talents and their potential. This can limit the expectations of women, and we can see this played out in the lack of women in senior positions in boardrooms across our city, and particularly in science, technology, engineering and the maths industries. There are countless small examples in our everyday work here in City Hall where we take these issues on board. The Assembly's Economy Committee report on apprenticeships said that the Mayor's Skills for Londoners Task Force should consider how hurdles experienced by women, disabled people and those from a BME background can be overcome, particularly by exploring the feasibility of flexible and part-time apprenticeships. This is just a really small example where the Mayor and where the work of the Assembly can show real action to level the playing field for women by removing the barriers that stop them, for instance, being able to access apprenticeship schemes. I also welcome the Mayor's draft police and crime plan outline that puts tackling violence against women and girls as a key priority. But there is much, much more to do. For example, there's much more protection is needed for London's network of specialist domestic violence services for BAME women. Evidence shows that these services are essential in encouraging women to come forward and helping them to escape from harmful and abusive situations. It's vital that the Mayor takes this on. Now, the Mayor and the Assembly should and do work actively in the interests of all women at all times, remembering particularly that BAME and trans women can suffer more prejudice and misogyny. I hope that every one of us in this chamber recognises the particular challenges faced by women and girls in London and around the world. And I hope that we are bold for change, and on this International Women's Day, we support the motion unanimously.
Assembly Member Curtin.
Chair, I'm very happy to support this motion on International Women's Day, and women have made immense strides in politics and in many, many areas over the last decades. We now have the second female Prime Minister of this country, which is a fantastic thing. In America last year we had the first female presidential candidate, Hillary Clinton. She lost the election and Donald Trump won. But that's probably due to the skill and the intelligence of the very first female campaign manager of a successful winning president of the United States election. So congratulations to her. Now, it's very good that the motion mentions stereotypes and countering stereotypes. Now, when we hear of International Women's Day and women's marches, we often see in some of the publications today lots of women wearing little pink hats and waving placards, as seems to be the fashion today. But that is really a false stereotype of the great things that women are doing. Last year, 2016, was a political earthquake of a year. We had Brexit, and that would not have happened without the many women, the dignified majority of women standing shoulder to shoulder with men to make sure that Brexit happened. Without the support and votes of activism of women, it wouldn't have happened. And long may that continue. Thank you.
Member Bailey.
Conservative side, just wanted to stress our support for this very sensible motion. When I read it, I did think to myself, well, this makes good sense because more than half of the world is women.
Yeah.
I come from a community that is based on women. It is strong women that brought us here, kept us here and keep us alive. Us on the Conservative benches welcome anything that will prompt the Mayor to continue the good work started to get about violence against women, started by the former Mayor. And we'd just like to point out that we're committed to this work. Our current Prime Minister, who happens to be a woman, who has the top job in the country, was delivered by an initiative called Women to Win. And she's not our first Trump, she's our second. We are good at this and we're happy to support this motion.
Assembly Member Bacon.
Yes, I think we're going to get unanimity here. I agree with the motion, I agree with the comments that I've heard from colleagues. Apart from one, I think Assemblymember Curtin's comment around this skill of Donald Trump's female campaign manager, who I'm sure was incredibly effective, I think was probably twinned with the gullibility of a large number of Americans in terms of electing Donald Trump instead of Hillary Clinton. But that's a personal view, which I throw out there to add a bit of controversy. I spend my life surrounded by women. My wife is one, my mother is one, my daughter will go into one. Even my two dogs are female. And so I take a keen interest in anything to do with women in general, and I'm very much pro them. I'm very proud to live under the reign of probably one of the most successful heads of state that this country has ever seen. I take great pride in the fact that my long-time political hero, and this will upset some of you, is Britain's first ever female Prime Minister. I'm a big fan of Britain's second female Prime Minister. Mention was made by Assemblymember Arnold in moving her motion that we have a female police commissioner for the first time in London, or indeed the country's history. Of course, we shouldn't overlook the fire service either, because the fire service blazed a trail, if I can use a slightly punnish expression, in appointing the first female commissioner in the fire brigade's 150-year history last year, and several of our members here were sat on a panel that did that. So yes, I'm very happy to support the amendment. The one addition to Jeanette Arnold's speech that I would make is that I'm looking forward very much to seeing the Labour Party elect their first female leader at some point in the future. Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Boff.
Just very quickly, I know we've got 10 motions. I hope that we can send a copy of our resolution to Jenny Murray and say to her, you know, some women are standing in the way of other women in order for recognition, and whoever identifies as female, they should have the rights of all women.
Assembly Member Arnold.
Chair, just a word.
Sorry.
Oh, no, you.
No. Nikki wants to speak.
On Sunday, thousands of women came here for a march organised by Helen Pankhurst. It was she runs CARE, and it was for Walk in Her Shoes. The cry, and it's Jeanette's cry, and it's the cry this year, Be Bold for Change, was dedicated to women seeking asylum this year, and people marched for it, led by Sadiq Khan, with Bianca Jagger, Annie Lennox and Helen, all round here, marching for that. Now, I'm very proud, actually, that my mother's birthday, I'll be personal, was today. And I was always proud that she was born on International Women's Day. I just want to say, she was an unaccompanied child who came here fleeing Nazi Germany. And when I think, I just want to, it's echoing really what was just said, that we need to work on our sisters too. Not all women are bold for change. And when I think of that very modest amendment by Alf Dubs and that shameful response from government, I think there's still work to be done. Thank you, Jeanette, for bringing this motion.
Oh, Assembly Member Whittle.
Hello. Yes, I would like to support obviously the motion. You know, and I also do commend you for the work that you did on the FGM seminar that we had upstairs. It was very encouraging to see, although some of the comments that were being made did slightly worry me in the sense that they were all about educating people more and all the rest of it. I would say that we've had many years now of education and there needs to be action. And that really brings me to my remarks, is that whilst we all support this motion, please let's not be complacent with what so many women are facing in Britain now. And I would say, when you mentioned Emily Pankhurst, I wonder what she would say with some of the more contemporary followers, or if you like, feminists, particularly on the left, who have not spoken out about certain areas such as FGM, such as Sharia law, and such as the honour-based violence that women face in Britain. And I would encourage, therefore, women to really talk out for women who often can't actually talk out for themselves and also don't even know their rights in these areas. So while it's good to have marches and what have you, it would be good also to have some marches about those things. Thank you very much, but I support the motion.
Chair, thank you. Just a few words, starting with Assembly Member Whittle. No complacency here, absolutely not. From a personal point of view, we've got so much work to do in my own party. It is about time that we had a Labour leader who could go on to be a Labour Prime Minister. I say thanks to Nikki, and she reminds us that when we're talking about International Women's Day, we're talking about the global issues that impact on women. And to my colleague, Andrew, we always are on the same page on this. And I say to Jenny Murray, trans women are real women, and what cloud are you on? And stay with what you know about, because clearly your comments were unacceptable. I would also like to thank Gareth for outing himself as a heterosexual with a mother, a female mother, and a female wife. And I also believe he has a female daughter who's gorgeous. So, you know, let us be bold, I say. Absolutely. Now, you know, we are going to keep on the work that we're going to do as an Assembly member. As I say, we are going to make this mayor the most feminist mayor. He set himself up there. We're going to make him deliver. And I thank you for your support.
Okay. Those in favour, please show. Okay. Good.
Unanimous? Yeah!
Okay. Assembly Member Sahota.
Right. Thank you, Chair. I'm moving this motion on the impact of the business rates upon the community of London. This revaluation of business rates is going to affect London disproportionately compared to the rest of the country. And I know that the Mayor has already made strong representations on this, as have other members of the Assembly. And London is facing a 900 million business rate hike as a result of the revaluation, which will fund equivalent of tax refund right across the country. Business rates are the fact that makes the fibre of this great city. It affects the small businesses, the theatres, the pubs, hospitality trade and restaurants. And the schools of London are going to get a double whammy. They're going to get a hike in the business rates and also get a cut in the school funding. A recent Federation of School Businesses survey showed of the London members that 1 in 5 will be facing an increase of up to 21 to 50% hike in their business rates. And almost 1/5 of them were thinking of relocating their businesses outside London. And that something like 27% were thinking of shutting their business in the next 5 years. The current business rate is unfair and disproportionate in London. It's unfair because it's based upon rental values of properties rather than profitability or affordability of this business rates. And secondly, that the appeals process is so complex. It's being made even more complex by the new regime that's been set up. It'll be multi-stage and much more difficult. We already have something like 250,000 appeals outstanding from the last re-evaluation we had in 2010, and something like 800 appeals still outstanding from the 2005 process. So this is not something which you can repeal very easily, on which you can get re-evaluation again. And also, the re-evaluation is done randomly, without warning, and without any reference to when you can predict it and when you can plan for it. A recent businessman said to me that this is like the mushroom syndrome, where you kept dark for many, many years, and then suddenly someone opens the door and throws a brown substance over you. And that's how businesses feel at the moment, that they're facing a huge hike and that they won't be able to cope. And I think that we need to raise this plight of the businesses in London as a united voice. And I know the Mayor's been doing a great job on this. The Mayor has already said that, has written to the Chancellor, and who hopefully will take this on board, that the Mayor should be given devolved powers, just like other London Assembly, just like other regional assemblies of Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales, that they can set their own business rates and they can keep that regime local and regional, so we can be effectively responding to the needs of business in London rather than having to based on a national basis. And also that the threshold should be raised from 12,000 to a higher level, which is proportionate to London, so that people can get relief when it happens. Of course, the Chancellor could also take on board the 5-point plan put forward by John McDonnell, but I certainly think that he should take on board what the Mayor has said, and we need to set up a common voice, a united voice, to strengthen the hand of the Mayor and to show this a cross-party sympathy and a cross-party concern for what's happening as the impact of this business rate hike from the 1st of April. So I move this motion, and I'm very grateful to my colleague, Assembly Member O'Connell, for supporting this.
Assembly Member O'Connell.
Thank you very much, Chair. Very happy to rise to support this motion, which I believe is very much a cross-party issue. I mean, the question about business rate is such as when I asked a business person about the business rates, they said to me, challenge back is, what do I get for my business rate? So it's a pernicious tax anyway, because if it's your council tax, you may get your bins collected, income tax, a whole swathe of wonderful benefits you'll get. Business tax in and of itself is a tax on businesses and entrepreneurship. And why this is an issue particularly is the disproportionate effect on London businesses. Now, I'll kind of personalise it. We've all got our district centres, no doubt, and we've all got our independent stores in those business centres. And I refer to Purley. In Purley, which is my local district centre, the average increase is 48%. And this is a district centre that is mainly small to medium businesses. And if I picture an average day of Steve, I get up in the morning, I go and get my paper. My newsagent is 42% increase. I go and have a coffee in my local coffee house, 59%. I'm pretty dishevelled, I go and get my hair cut. That is 60% increase in that barber's business rate. I then think about putting a bet on can Palace win on Saturday, 38% increase on that shop. I take my dry cleaning in, 40%. These are actual figures in a district centre, and you'll have these figures in your own district centres. Later in the day, I'll pop into Wetherspoons, which Tom and I support enormously, 22% increase in Wetherspoons. Now, I've just helped keep that Wetherspoons open in Purley. Those central people are going to look at an added pressure on their rates. And, of course, I'll potter down and get my takeaway curry, 67% increase in my local curry house on their business rates. And if it's all too much for me and I have to be looked after by Roland's funeral directors at a heavy day, they go up by 21%. And perversely, so out of the 178 businesses in that broad area, 112 have increases of more than 40%. And perversely, and why this is morally wrong, in my view, is that one of the very few businesses with a cut is, you can guess, Tesco's. So Tesco's are one of the very few businesses, and this is consistent with the theme with large retail supermarkets are finding cuts in their business rates under this unfair scheme. And we're going back to businesses. I mean, my wife runs a small business. I know the pressures and the small margins that these businesses are under pressure for. By adding these percentage increases, that will tip many over the balance. Now, we hear about the transition arrangements. Now, if you can understand them, you're a better person than I am. They are complex. There is some transition support, and I thank my local MP, Chris Philp, who has urged government for a rethink. So, there is a lot of uncertainty around this. It appears to me that the government proposition is basically clobbering small business, and we cannot support that. And I think this afternoon, shortly, now, we hear the Chancellor rise, and I know he's been under pressure quite properly cross-party around this. I hope to hear from him today some clarity, some reassurance, and some change of heart around this measure. So I'm very happy to support Dr Sahota in this, and I hope we can get support of the whole chamber. Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Bacon.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I will be supporting this as well. I think the motion's been very ably moved and seconded as well, if I may say so, and it's good that we get cross-party support for something like this. I think it is important, whilst supporting the motion, that there is some context that needs to be put into play here as well, which is last year's budget, government budget, cut business rates nationwide by £6.7 billion over 5 years, and that and some of the measures in this year's budget, or sorry, in this year's proposals, will actually lift 600,000 businesses, small businesses up and down the country, out of having to pay business rates altogether. But the context that is very, very important for us is that, as ever with these things, London is disproportionately hit in order to finance a lot of what goes on in the rest of the country. And I think the government do need to be very careful not to slay the goose that lays the golden eggs all the time, because we've seen it in a number of things, and indeed today we have some motions on the table. It's not just the business rates one, there's the education funding one that's coming up shortly, where London, time and time again, is the one that has to put its hand in its pocket to pay for things happening elsewhere. And I think that is something the government needs to be very mindful of, and I think that they are. I mean, we've, on this side, have been speaking to members of Parliament and also to government ministers to make the case around this, and various reassuring noises have been made, and as Assemblyman O'Connell has just said, we will find out the proof of those reassuring noises very soon indeed. Indeed, it might be being announced right at this moment. Within the context of the changes that are being made, there are some winners, even in London, but there are also some notable losers. Steve has given some very good examples of things that are happening in his constituency. In my constituency, on average, of the two boroughs, Bexley will go down by 4%, but Bromley will go up by 5%, which doesn't sound like a great deal, but within that, there are some very similar examples to the ones that Steve has given, of businesses that are facing shatteringly large increases. Day nurseries seem to be getting hit particularly hard, in some cases increases of over 200%. Now that will certainly put some of these businesses into administration, because they won't be able to swallow that kind of cost. And when they're getting nothing back for the money that they're paying, it does seem a bit pernicious and a bit unfair. So I think, I'm hoping that all members will support this, because I think London's business needs to be protected, particularly as we approach Brexit. I think introducing this kind of uncertainty into our economy, which already has enough to grapple with, I think is probably a step too far. So I hope that the government will listen, but in the meantime, I'm very happy indeed to support this motion.
Assembly Member Sahota.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank for the comments made by Assemblymember Bacon and, of course, for Assemblymember O'Connell seconding this. And, of course, this is an unfair tax which acts disproportionately. And also it's a postcode lottery about this. I mean, my borough, the borough of Hillingdon, is getting a 1% rise, thankfully. But next door, Elaine, is getting 12%. Hounslow is getting 25%. And so this, and Hammersmith and Fulham are getting 36%. So there are huge variations across London. It's an unfair taxation, and I'm really glad that we are able to send hopefully we can send up a unanimous message to the government, and that we can get a much better system in place. Thank you.
Those in favour of the motion, please show. Okay. Unanimous. Right. Assembly Member Cooper, would you please spell out the amendment?
I'm sorry, the amendment?
You've amended your motion. I beg your pardon. Somebody is going to amend your motion.
I think that's the way around.
All right. Okay. Assembly Member Russell, amend. Please move the motion
first?
And then we will have an amendment from.
Okay. Well, given the number of motions that we've got and the the amendments that may or may not be being moved as well. I'm going to be reasonably brief, Chair. And in fact, I think the motion pretty much speaks for itself. Obviously, winter is coming to an end at the moment, but there are a lot of Londoners who have been concerned in the cold weather about their rising energy bills, and that concern will continue for some time, even after milder spring weather has arrived. So, as the motion mentions, we've just seen a flurry of announcements coming through from energy companies, including npower, saying that they're going to raise their prices by almost 10%. And for many Londoners, that's going to be a particularly bitter pill to swallow, given some of the reasons that the energy companies have been setting out for the reason for the rises, or excuses, as I think we might in fact term them. Somebody wrote to me and said that they'd had a letter from their energy supplier stating that they were blaming the government for the price rise and talking about the government's green levies as being the reason. Now, as many people in this chamber will know, those green levies have been used to fund domestic energy retrofit projects, but because of the costs of London, the same energy companies who are using this as their feeble excuse for putting up prices for Londoners have failed signally to actually undertake enough of that insulation in London. We lag well behind the rest of the country. So Londoners are in effect being saddled with higher bills and not even seeing the benefit of the greater energy efficiency that the companies have been promising. Now, the Mayor has made a good start with his announcements about his imminent fuel poverty action plan and the launch of his Better Boiler scheme, and talking about energy for Londoners, and we'll come on to cover that, I think, in the amendment a bit. We've come a long way from when the previous Mayor decided to poach somebody else's fuel poverty action plan and then try and pass it off as his own. But the energy companies, as well as the Mayor, must play their part, as well as the Mayor and all of his team. And unless they do so, the 1 million Londoners who have to choose whether to heat or eat is surely going to be a number that will increase. I urge all Londoners, I urge all members to support this motion, as well as moving ahead swiftly with his own plans. We want the Mayor to also lobby to try and stop the big six energy companies just jacking up their bills all the time. Thank you very much.
Assemblymember Copley.
Formally, Chair.
Assemblymember Russell.
Yes, this amendment very simply adds the wording to call on the Mayor to speed up the formation of his fully licensed energy company, Energy for Londoners. And that's because it would give him the power to really tackle fuel poverty by providing a proper alternative to the big six and their sky-high prices. For example, in Bristol, Bristol Energy, which is a fully licensed energy supply company set up by Bristol City Council, has saved their customers £240 a year when they've switched from the big six to the standard variable tariffs. We've just seen npower announce a huge electricity price hike, and even though Ofgem didn't see any case for this rise, with the other large energy suppliers very likely to follow, even more Londoners risk going further into fuel poverty and struggling to stay warm. That's why I've amended the motion to, I'm proposing an amendment to include speeding up the formation of the fully licensed energy supply company, and also why I fully support the motion.
I understand from the mover of the original motion that she has accepted your amendment.
Yes, we did.
It didn't get moved.
So we can...
Yes.
Yeah.
So we now have a motion which is amended. Do you wish to speak on it, Assembly?
No, I've just said what I was going to say. It's fine.
No, I'm asking your putative seconder.
Oh, George, no, if it's going to include the Mayor's promise, then
Okay. Those in favour, please show.
18 in favour.
Okay, those against? Right, okay, motion is carried. And now we have a motion in the name of Assemblymember Cooper.
Yes, sorry about that, Chair. It's merely by coincidence. Members, I think most of us would describe ourselves as campaigners, if not now, certainly before we came into this place, and I think most of us still would. But whatever our background or our route into politics, we've become involved in campaigning on a wide range of issues that matter to us and our constituents and Londoners as a whole. And as well as being campaigners, we will also become the focus because of being Assembly members of other people who are campaigning. So sitting on both sides of that fence, I think many of us will have views that we formed about the best way to undertake a persuasive and successful campaign. And I believe that that is those that probably make the most constructive suggestions rather than just spend a lot of time simply throwing rocks. And that takes me to the heart of what the Mayor has been trying to say, not just about air quality in general, but specifically on the issue of diesel scrappage. And like Assembly Member Bacon, who was talking about possible things that are being talked about even as we speak in another place, I am crossing my fingers that diesel scrappage is something that the Chancellor is currently discussing in his budget. And what has the Mayor done? The Mayor has commissioned an excellent feasibility study, which I hope, if you've not yet read, that you take the time to do so, produced by TfL and the Cambridge Economic Policy Associates, and it shows the government a really good way forward on diesel scrappage. We can't just have London diesel scrappage, we must have a national scheme. So the Mayor has really put his money where his mouth is on this. A scrappage scheme, as we know, would be a significant undertaking, but in the context of the air quality crisis that London and indeed many other cities are now suffering, radical measures are really, really needed. In particular, I'd just like to pull out a couple of aspects of the study to demonstrate some of the thinking that has gone into it. Any scrappage scheme cannot result in a perverse incentive to encourage people to go back to petrol. There was a reason why ministers originally encouraged the move, and it is actually now 16 years ago that the encouragement was introduced in the vehicle excise system to move away from petrol in 2001, and that is because we know that petrol too is significantly implicated in climate change. But we can't go back to what happened then, where we then encouraged people towards diesel, and then in 15 or 16 years' time, we're then calling for another scrappage scheme, this time for the petrol vehicles. No, what we need is something that moves people somewhere else altogether, so that we have we don't have a well-intentioned scheme that is ultimately ineffectual. Or indeed, that is what could happen if we had an outright diesel ban, that there would then be a rush to petrol. This scheme is focused on modal shift, not merely switching from one fuel to another, but in some cases switching for a diesel car altogether to public transport. The Mayor is doing everything that he can to tackle air pollution, but government must take its share of responsibility too. And actually, I would just like to commend a number of London boroughs of all political complexions who are also starting to step up and take a lot of action on air quality as well. In particular, Westminster and Merton, who've both made recent announcements about increasing the cost for casual parking and increasing the cost for parking permits for those who continue to choose diesel vehicles. So it's something that needs to be done at local authority level, at London level, and then also at government level. So the ball is now firmly in the government's court. Londoners will be watching to see how the government proceeds, and hopefully we'll hear a successful announcement today. So I'm crossing my fingers for that. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Just really to add, because my colleague, Assembly Member Cooper, has covered most of the points. I have lived in London all my life, in South London, but as a driver, I have used the Dartford crossing, and I think the government's claim to omit the Dartford crossing from EU emissions in terms of it being classified as a rural road. Even I do get out, even I could say that's wrong. So in essence, we are calling on the government to take the Mayor's approach in making air quality a higher political priority. Too many lives are being lost, not just in London, across the UK with this. There's a real urgency now. There's good cross-party support. This has to be at the centre of the Department of Transport strategy, and we call on the government to do their bit.
Assembly Member Bacon.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's very well known that London does have an air quality problem. Members on all sides agree with that. The previous Mayor agreed with it. which is why you have proposals in train to deal with it, which the new mayor is looking to expand and bring forward. Substantially, the proposals that he is bringing forward are the same as the previous mayor, they're simply bigger. So we, unsurprisingly, agree with a lot of what this motion is proposing, and we will vote for it, but within that we reserve our right to disagree with some of the mayor's proposals, and we can have that debate probably another time because there's not enough time now. But I think what needs to be done, and Assemblymember Cooper's made the point that the public have been not gulled into it, not forced into it, but they've been encouraged by previous government decisions and previous government propaganda to buy diesel vehicles. And that has caused a problem, and there now needs to be a way of resolving that, and simply forcing these people in a punitive way not to be able to drive their cars, I don't think is a reasonable or proportionate way of doing it. So having some kind of financial incentive, some kind of diesel scrappage scheme is clearly the right way forward. Now the question is at what level you pitch that level of scrappage remuneration, because simply offering £3,000 or whatever, if you've got a car that's worth £30,000 or £40,000 and it happens to be diesel and you're offering them £3,000 to trade it in, that's just not going to do it. The idea that it would drive people back to petrol, well, it will, because the problem with that is people will still need to get around. And I think if you live in Zone 1 or you live in Zone 2, you can say we'll get public transport. Great, but if you live in Sutton, or you live in Bromley, or you live in Bexley, where the London Underground doesn't exist, or Redbridge, you are going to drive your cars, and if it becomes financially unviable to drive a diesel car, you're going to drive a petrol, unless there is an alternative. There are alternatives out there. I think the future of motoring is going to be electric. I think probably people will accept that. But the trouble is it's not there yet. The charge-up time for electric vehicles is simply far too long to make it viable, unless you're using it for a run around back and forth to the shops, and that's all you're doing it. But if you drive any kind of distance and it takes you 8 hours to recharge your vehicle, you're not going to go for that. There is a viable alternative, and I think it's something the government should think about very carefully, and that's liquid petroleum gas, which reduces the particulates by 99%, and the NO2 by around about 80%, and I think that that is something that they could push in the intervening period. While we are waiting for electric to get to where it needs to get to, I think LPG could be the solution. So, from us, we will support this motion, but as I say, we don't necessarily agree with all of the punitive measures that the Mayor is proposing, or indeed that the government might propose going forward, because we think there are alternatives, and we think that they should be explored. Thank you.
Assemblymember Bailey.
Just to continue the theme, I very much consider myself under the tutelage of the Environment Committee. I'm learning bundles from Assemblymember Cooper and also Russell, who regularly school me. I found myself able to support this, but there's just one small thing in it. When you talk about modal shift, it seems to me that we need a halfway point. I too agree with my colleague, Assemblymember Bacon, that electric vehicles are not there yet. So the petroleum gas, particularly for cabs, for the black cab fleet, if the Mayor could do something about that, a loan scheme, etc., as suggested in our report, that would make this proposal that much stronger, because the massive financial cost of taking it on a small business that a black cabbie is will not take that on. But apart from that missing part of this, I find it acceptable. And just one small point, when it comes to poaching ideas, the current Mayor did poach the night tube. You wouldn't know that if you were in the public.
Assemblymember Russell.
Yes, I fully, or the Green Group also fully supports this motion. In particular, this is probably where I differ from Gareth, who was just talking about the future of motoring. And actually, this diesel crisis is a chance for us to reset our transport system, to make sure that those people who are living out in Redbridge, in Harrow, in Bexley, and sort of all the outer parts of London where there isn't so much good public transport, we need to make sure that those areas do have access to good public transport, so the option of not having to go everywhere by car is available to more people, because the pollution that is being experienced in outer London is very, very high, and those communities need to have the opportunity to be able to walk, to cycle, and to use public transport. And that is what is so inspiring about what the Mayor has put into his scrappage proposals.
Those in favour, please show. Those against? Motion is carried. Motion in the name of Assemblymember Arnold.
Thank you, Chair. I propose this motion today on the proposed phased introduction of a new national funding formula. I'll refer to it as the NFF. The proposed introduction will be from 2018 to 19. If supported, and I hope unanimously, this motion highlights the Assembly's concerns on the NFF's impact on London schools. Colleagues, the transformation in London schools is something that we should feel proud about, and it should be viewed by government with pride. In 2006, London was the worst performing region at both secondary and primary level. Now, the capital has the best GCSE results in the country, 60% of our pupils achieving 5 A stars to C grades, compared with a national average of 53%. London remains the highest performing region at Key Stage 4, with 59% of pupils meeting or exceeding the new standard in reading, writing and mathematics in 2016. Overall, pupils in London are more likely to attend a good or outstanding school than pupils anywhere else in the country. 93% of London schools are rated as good or outstanding by Ofsted. This is the highest of any region and an increase from 88% in August 2015. It just goes to show the difference that adequate funding can make to our education system. But this is now under threat. The NFF proposed by government disproportionately affects London schools. The government state that they want to make school funding fairer across the country, and goes on to say that London receives more than its fair share. What an unworthy position for a government to take regarding schools funding for its capital city. Now, I'm not saying that schools outside London do not deserve adequate funding too, but it should not be based on a funding policy for our schools that robs Peter to pay Paul. And London's pupils should not be penalised for doing well. Colleagues, it doesn't make good business sense. Instead, the government should look at how they could replicate the success of London schools. Colleagues, I know that you will agree with me when I say all schools deserve a level of funding which mean that they could do the best possible job for children and provide them with the skills for the future. But London's pupils should not be penalised by unfair cuts for doing well. These cuts to London schools come on top of a £3 billion cut to schools across the country, equivalent to an 8% loss in real terms, and this is caused by inflation, cost of the national living wage, higher employer contributions to national insurance and pensions, and the apprenticeship levy. These cuts mean that head teachers across London need to make huge savings in their budgets. This might mean making staff redundant, removing vital services such as the school counsellor, speech and language therapist, seeing class sizes increase from mid-20s to 30 or more, and adding to the struggle that London faces with recruiting and retaining teachers. These cuts will mean that schools where 40% of pupils are eligible for free meals will lose the most, the children for whom a good education is a route out of poverty. Government educational policy should not be aimed at increasing inequality, it should be aimed at reducing inequality in the 21st century. Colleagues, while not all the improvements in London schools are based on increased funding, there are legitimate fears about whether they can continue to thrive without it. Colleagues, I'm going to just move to my last comments and ask and say the education of future generations and the future well-being of London's economy is at risk. Colleagues, I urge you to support this motion unanimously so that we are of one voice when we call on the Mayor to write to the Secretary of State for Education, the Right Honourable Justine MP, a London MP herself, to ask her to review and re-evaluate the proposed funding formula so that a new proposal can come forward that will mitigate its effect on London students. I thank you.
I'm formally seconding this motion. Assembly Member Dismore.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to say a great deal. I mean, I hear Jeanette's plea for cross-party support for this motion, but I'd like to mention firstly that Barnet is losing £23 million, £497 per head a child, and Camden losing £471 per head. But what I'm particularly concerned about is that Barnet, a Conservative-controlled local authority, the Children Education Libraries and Safeguarding Committee Chair, Councillor Reuben Thompson, who is responsible for education in the borough, is actually supporting these changes. He's been asked time and again by schools and by Labour councillors to write to the government to oppose these changes, but he supports them. And what I am concerned about is here we have a council that is so obsessed with its political correctness as far as its own party is concerned that it's not even prepared to stand up for children in its own borough. I think that's disgraceful. And I think what's equally disgraceful is that we've got the position where Barnet's 3 Conservative MPs haven't said a peep about it either, except, of course, they voted for the cuts, as they always do. And it's all well and good calling for a cross-party support here, and I hope that we'll have a unanimous motion, but let's be realistic and see what Conservative councillors are actually doing on the ground, i.e. supporting these cuts to the detriment of London schools, in particular in this case Barnet schools and Barnet's children.
Okay. Those in favour of the motion, please show.
Yes.
Okay. Motion is carried. Motion in the name of Assembly Member Eshalomi.
I'm mindful of time and I think this baby's hungry as well, Chair. Just to say, this motion is, there has been an amendment proposed by the Tories which we do accept in the name of Gareth Bacon, Assembly Member Bacon. Yeah. The motion is quite simple and it's quite clear. It just outlines the unfairness of the proposed English language test being proposed by TfL. The reality is even TfL's own figures shows that almost 45%, circa 33,000 drivers, could actually fail this test and lose their livelihoods. I think the other thing about this test is the fact that a number of private hire and vehicle drivers, English is not their first language, so there's the discriminationary element of this test as well. We fully accept that all drivers should have a level of English in terms of communicating with their passengers. This is important around the safety of passengers getting into their taxis, but having to force them to write a written essay, I'm not really sure how this will demonstrate safety for those passengers. We are simply asking for TfL to revisit this and look at alternatives which are proven, which are working with other authorities, and actually say we do not feel that penalising drivers during this really difficult climate is the right way to go, and we'd ask TfL to review this. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Assembly Member Desai.
Formally, but I reserve my right to speak if there's a debate.
Okay. Now, this is Assembly Member Berry has indicated she wishes to speak. Are you speaking on the amended motion?
We know moving of the amendment, is that right?
Yep.
Speak on the amended motion.
Yeah, I just wanted to explain.
Yes, I have, but she... Do carry on.
I just wanted to explain I'm fully supportive of the spirit of this motion. I'm sort of the stepdaughter of a private hire taxi company owner. I used to work in the office with a load of private hire drivers. Reducing the burdens on them in terms of the new English language tests I completely appreciate, especially the discrimination points that you make. We, as a group, will abstain from the motion, however, because we have an issue with including the advanced driving test as part of the additional burdens being placed on drivers within the motion. We did try to discuss removing it. I didn't want to prolong everyone's agony by putting an amendment to the motion ourselves and arguing for it. We couldn't get the proposers to agree in private. So I think we're just going to abstain. We simply can't put our names to a motion that implies that high driving standards are a burden when they could make a real difference to safety of Londoners.
Assembly Member Bacon.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I'm grateful to Assemblymember Eshalomi for accepting the amendment. It was intended as a friendly amendment, and I think the Labour Group have seen it as such. TfL have got themselves into a bit of a bind here because I think what they've tried to do is throw a bone to the LTDA, the black cab industry, because one of their perennial complaints about particularly Uber is that Uber tends to be staffed by drivers who come from overseas, who may or may not have a reasonable grip of English. And so TfL have employed a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And I think every member around this chamber would agree that anybody who is taking passengers should have a good command of English. But I personally cannot conceive of a single instance where a driver would have to sit there and write an essay for their passenger. You simply don't have to do that. There are topography tests that have to be taken. The black cab industry employ these, where you have to map a route in English using the various tools available, maps and so forth. That surely should demonstrate that you have sufficient grasp of English to drive somebody in your cab. Now I've met, and I'm sure other members have as well, I've heard Assemblymember Dismal making representations previously in here. I've had meetings with a number of private hire vehicle companies in my constituency, all of whom are getting swept up in this. I think so. TfL have employed essentially a Zone 1 solution to a Zone 1 problem, but unfortunately everybody gets affected by it. And it's not, in fact, it's not just cab drivers where English is not their first language that get swept up in this. I had a meeting with Steve Wright, who is Steve Wright MBE, the former board member of Transport for London, who is the chairman or chief executive of the LPCHA, I think we're the wrong way around, but anyway. He's a natural-born Briton. English is his only language, and he would be required to take this test because he cannot produce exam certificates proving that he has educational qualifications in English. He's got over 200,000 miles of passenger carries under his belt, and he would have to take this test. Now, of course, I would expect him to pass it, but there'll be a number of other drivers whose educational attainment is not at a particularly high level who would struggle. And it's not the spoken test they struggle with, it's the written test. And there are 4 different tests that you have to undertake when you do this. And TfL's rules, which again are sledgehammers crack a nut, if you fail one of these tests, you have to reset the entire lot. And it's £180 a time, and of course you have to take time off from work to do it. It takes all day. So you could lose up to, when the motion mentions £300, but it could actually be up to around about £500 losses every single time you take this test. And for very experienced taxi drivers, you have to question what is the worth of doing it. A lot of these people will be driven out of the business as a direct result of this. And I really do think that TfL need to think about it. Apparently what they have done, they've looked at it and they've said, well, we're not going to implement it now. The full implementation, we'll put that back until September. But that's not good enough. They need to take another long, hard look at this. And, I mean, we all know Assemblymember Shawcross, those of us who are here before, but some of you guys know her particularly better than we do. And I would urge you to bring this to her attention and really try and get her to change direction on this, because it is going to hurt an industry that really doesn't need to be hurt, and it's doing it needlessly. So I'm very, very happy to support this motion. I thank the Labour Group for accepting the amendment, and I hope it goes through unanimous, subject to 2 abstentions, goes through unanimously.
Assemblymember Boff.
My colleague Gareth Bacon originally wanted to ask me to second the amendment. It was accepted, so it didn't need to be. But in the meantime, I've been looking up the exams, and they're quite entertaining. And for example, what appears to be relevant to TfL is a deep and thorough understanding of river pollution in Vanuatu and the remedies that might come from that. A very worthy thing, may I say, but I don't think it would necessarily help my driver negotiate me from Barking to Westminster. Another subject is the health benefits of swimming. Which you have to explain really, or presumably not in Vanuatu, and also another example of the exams is that you've got to understand and explain the circadian rhythms of sleep and have an understanding of that. And I'm struggling. I really don't want my taxi driver concerning himself with sleeping, actually. I think I'd rather like them to stay awake. So I've rewritten the test for them, and a quick oral test, and it's simply this, and we'll see the comprehension. Could you take me to Forest Gate, but stop at Brixton to pick up a friend? That seems a bit expensive. What's your driver number? Please, could you open your window as it smells of sick in here? Are you sure the quickest way to Acton is via Harrow on the Hill? And this is the 3rd time you've driven past the Royal Vauxhall Tavern. Are you sure you're not lost? Now, I actually submit to the Assembly that that is a better exam for drivers in London than it would be than anything that TfL have come up with to date. So I will be supporting the motion.
Second member Pidgey.
Very much. I think Andrew should be employed by TfL in that section and to help them with this. Being able to speak English reasonably is vital to ensure passengers are safe and have a reasonable service. But also drivers, I do think, need to be able to read English properly, to look at signs, maps, also to understand their licensing requirements and guidance they are given. But this idea, the ability to write at a well, it says a reasonable standard, probably quite a high standard, it's excessive and should be reviewed. It's TfL at their worst, isn't it, once again. There was strong pressure and the Transport Committee was behind it on the last Mayor to update the regulations on taxi and private hire industries, and we said that things were not fit for purpose at that time, and we did raise the English test there. But in hindsight, clearly mistakes were made, because actually the proposed changes went to the TfL board on the 17th of March 2016, days before PERDA started. There were 27 items on that agenda for the board to consider. The item on regulations was over 800 pages long. I would be surprised if any of the board members read part of those, let alone all of those papers. So little attention was paid to this issue, and little attention was given to the impact assessment, which specifically said of the new English test it would have a major adverse impact on equalities for drivers. You know, it's really important that TfL review this urgently. I'm hoping with the Uber case out the way, they are then in a position to do this. And actually, what they need is powers to cap private hire, because I have to say, this is a way of trying to cap private hire licences by the back door. And it's not working. It's having a really damaging impact on many Londoners who are private hire drivers and work hard for a living. So we need to make sure TfL get those powers rather than trying to do it by the back door. I support this motion today.
Assembly Member Cooper. I beg your pardon.
No.
Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everyone for your contributions. And I think, again, this gets to the nub of what this motion is proposing and what we're asking TfL London Mayor to look at. The reality is there is an issue around the number of private hire vehicles on our roads in London, and it's growing. But I think this route in trying to clamp down on that is not the right way. The basic fairness element of this test is unfair for a number of drivers. We're happy that TfL have proposed to not implement the test from this March and push that back to September. And I'm hoping that will give them time to actually review what we're proposing today, look at some of those additional tests that are already out there that drivers and licensing authorities are using, and actually say, you know, let's try and look at a revised proposal. We have raised this with Val Shawcross, Deputy Mayor for Transport. We'll continue to raise it with her and the Mayor. And just to say that we feel that, you know, this is something that should be addressed in the right way to ensure that, you know, drivers can continue to work and earn a livelihood in London. Thank you.
Those in favour, please show.
10, 14, that's 15, Jim.
Okay, those against? Motion is carried. We now have a statement from Assembly Member Copley in relation to his comments on the speech made by Assembly Member Curtin.
I just wanted to apologise to members for my outburst during Assemblymember Curtin's speech, but I would say that I think that when we come and make speeches in this chamber, we need to be sure that we're not just repeating things in newspapers that then turn out to be untrue, particularly when those things might stir up hatred against a vulnerable group like child migrants.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 7, will you please agree the revised draft on GLA expenses and benefits framework? Thank you very much. Will you please confirm the actions taken by me in relation to the appointment of Dr. Liz Goodwin as Chair of the London Waste and Recycling Board? Thank you very much. Item 9. Will you please note the commitments made by the Mayor during Mayor's Question Time meetings held between September 2016 and February 2017? Thank you. Will you please note the date of the next meeting, which is Mayor's Question Time, 10 o'clock on Wednesday, the 22nd of March? Thank you. Andrew Boff.
We coming to the end of the meeting, which has been very long, and we've dealt with some motions, I don't think, in a great deal of detail because of the number. Would there be a possibility for the Bureau to consider the way in which we deal with motions? In many local authorities, motions are first considered by committees before they come to the full council. And if, for example, we've got a motion on housing, why not be considered by the Housing Committee before coming here? And some of those issues then might be resolved. But I certainly haven't been able to give all the attention I wanted to all the subjects that are brought up in those 10 motions. And I think we're letting down Londoners if we don't fully commit ourselves to those subjects.
Is the proposal that this be referred to the Bureau?
Yes.
Okay, would you agree that? Thank you very much. There's no other urgent business.
I mean, who would determine what comes to plenary and what doesn't?
GLA, Chamber